Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Revenger What If, presenting to you today, what if Naruto was reborn as a Targaryen with the Kyuubi as his dragon and burned the Iron Throne to ash? Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Boy with Whisker marks the first thing Naruto noticed about being reborn was how cold it was. Not the cold of a winter morning in Konoha, where you could pull a blanket tighter and ignore it for another hour. This was the wet, bone-deep cold of a stone building that had never once in its history been adequately heated, and it pressed against his newborn skin like a living thing. He couldn't move his arms properly. He couldn't speak. The world was a blur of orange torchlight and faces he didn't recognize, and someone was crying, a woman, somewhere close, and a man's voice was saying something in a language that felt almost familiar, the way a song sounds when you've heard it once before and can't quite place the melody. He was, without any question, a baby. He was also, without any question, completely aware of this fact. Well, said a voice inside his chest, not quite in his ears, not quite in his head, but somewhere in the warm space between heartbeats, this is new. Naruto would have laughed if his lungs had been cooperating. As it was, he did the only thing a newborn body was equipped to do, which was cry. The sound that came out was embarrassingly small. He was used to being loud in a way that shook walls. This was more like a kitten. Don't you dare laugh, he thought, directing it inward. I'm not laughing, Kurama replied. I'm processing. Give me a moment. He was given a moment, and then several more, because the woman who picked him up was shaking badly and the man with the unfamiliar voice had gone quiet in the way men go quiet when something is happening that they don't know how to survive emotionally. Naruto let himself be held. He was very small. There wasn't much else to do. It took him 3 days to piece together the basics, because for the first 3 days he slept almost constantly, the body insisting on its own schedule regardless of what the mind wanted. And when he was awake he was eating or being bathed or stared at by a rotating cast of people with silver hair and worried eyes. It took him a week to understand that the language they were speaking was a version of High Valyrian, and another week on top of that before enough of it clicked into place that he could start following conversations. He had always been better at languages than his academy score suggested. Irika-sensei had said so once. He held on to that thought the way you hold on to a handhold on a cliff face, not because it was the most important thought he had, but because it was something real and warm in a landscape that was still resolving itself into coherence. By the time he was a month old, he had the broad strokes. He was in Essos. He was somewhere in the general vicinity of the Free Cities, in a house that had seen better decades, staffed by servants who moved carefully and spoke quietly and occasionally looked over their shoulders in the particular way that people look over their shoulders when they're afraid of something specific. His mother, and she was his mother, he had decided, because she had not put him down voluntarily for more than an hour since his birth, and whatever else was true about this life, that counted for something, was a Lyseni noblewoman named Sorel, with pale hair and grey eyes and hands that were never quite still. His father had come and gone twice in the first month, each visit brief and charged with an emotion Naruto couldn't yet name at 1 month old, though he would name it later, when he was older and better at reading rooms. Guilt, mostly. With a layer of something more complicated underneath. His father had silver hair. His father had purple eyes. His father had the kind of face that had probably been handsome once, before whatever had happened to it had happened. He looked at Naruto the way some people look at a fire they accidentally started, simultaneously awed and terrified and not entirely sure whether to feed it or douse it. His father was Ares' son. His father was a Targaryen. Of course, Kurama said, when Naruto had assembled enough information to lay it out internally. Of course we ended up here. You know this world. I know stories. I know fire and dragons and the particular flavor of human stupidity that builds a throne out of weapons and then acts surprised when sitting on it hurts. A pause. Also I may have had a great deal of time to process various cultural memories while you were sleeping in the womb. 4 months is a long time. You were awake the whole time I was in the womb. There was nothing else to do. Naruto decided not to think too hard about that. The thing about being a baby with the complete memories of a man who had lived an entire life, fought a war, loved people, lost people, led a village for decades, and then died old and tired and at peace, the thing about being that, in a new body, in a new world, was that the grief hit sideways. Not like a wave. More like a slow leak. He would be lying in his crib looking at the ceiling, and suddenly the shape of Hinata's laugh would surface in his memory so clearly that his chest ached with it, and he had no way to process that ache because he was an infant and his face didn't yet cooperate with complex emotional expression. He cried sometimes without knowing he was going to. His mother would come immediately, every time, and hold him, and speak softly in Valyrian, and he would let her because it helped even if she didn't know what she was helping with. He told Kurama, once, lying awake in the dark. "Do you think they're okay? Everyone back there?" "Yes," Kurama said, with the particular certainty of someone who has been around long enough to mean it. "You left them whole. You built something that lasted. That's more than most people manage. It's not the same as being there." "No," Kurama agreed. "It isn't. But you're here now. And there are people here who are going to need exactly what you are." Naruto looked at the ceiling. In the next room, his mother was humming something. Outside, someone was shouting in the street, and a horse's hooves clattered across cobblestones. Yeah, he thought. I know. He was 3 years old the first time he climbed out of his crib on purpose. His nurse, a broad-shouldered woman named Mira who had approximately zero patience for nonsense but an unexpected and fierce protectiveness toward him that she expressed by never admitting it, found him in the kitchen an hour before dawn, sitting on the floor eating cold bread and looking at the cook's knife collection with the focused interest of a professional. "What in the name of all the gods are you doing?" she demanded. "Hungry," he said, which was true, and also the word he had been practicing, because the Valyrian word for hungry had a particular construction he kept getting wrong and he was tired of being wrong about it. She stared at him. He had noticed that people stared at him fairly often. He had a theory about why, which involved his face, specifically the 3 lines on each cheek that apparently no maester could explain and several had written anxious letters to each other about. Also his hair, which was the precise color of sunlight on old gold, which was not typical for a Targaryen, and his eyes, which couldn't decide whether to be blue or violet and had settled on a compromise that pleased nobody. "You're 3, Mira said. "Yes," he agreed. "You climbed out of the crib yourself. The rail comes loose on the left side if you push it at an angle." He tore another piece of bread. "You should tell someone." She told someone. They fixed the rail. He found 2 other ways out within the week, and after that they stopped fighting it and started leaving the crib side down, which was all he'd wanted in the first place. He grew fast, not unnaturally, not in any way that anyone could point to and name, but he was tall for his age and coordinated in a way that children generally weren't, and he listened to conversations with an attention that made adults uncomfortable without quite knowing why. He learned Valyrian first, then the bastard tongue of the free cities that everyone actually used in the market, then enough of the common tongue of Westeros that when a merchant from King's Landing visited when Naruto was 4, he understood about 60% of what the man said and was understanding 90% by the time the man left 2 weeks later. Languages came because he worked at them. Everything came because he worked at it. That had always been true. His mother noticed. She was, he came to understand, a quietly brilliant woman living a difficult life, and she had loved his father in the way people love things that hurt them, and she had decided somewhere along the way to pour everything she had into her son instead. She started teaching him to read at age 3, High Valyrian first, then the common tongue. She taught him the history of the Targaryens with the careful, thorough passion of someone who had studied it because she needed to understand the man she loved. She taught him the geography of Westeros from memory, drawing maps on parchment with a quill that scratched softly in the evening quiet, her voice low and steady while Naruto sat cross-legged on the floor and listened. He already knew most of it. He absorbed it anyway, because hearing it from her meant something different. "Your father," she said one evening, when he was 5 and they were sitting in the narrow garden behind the house where 2 scraggly lemon trees grew more out of spite than any horticultural encouragement, is a complicated man. I know, Naruto said. She looked at him. You say that as if you know what it means. I know what complicated means. He was pulling grass apart blade by blade, methodical. It means he loves you and he's also afraid, and the afraid part is winning right now. Sarel was quiet for a long moment. A breeze moved the lemon trees. In the distance, the city made its constant city noise. Yes, she said finally, very softly. That's exactly what it means. He looked up. Her eyes were bright in the way eyes go bright before crying, and he scooted across the garden stones and sat against her side because there was nothing useful to say and presence was usually better than words anyway. She put her arm around him. He leaned in. You're good at that, Kurama said. At what? Knowing what people need. I had practice, Naruto thought, and left it there. His father visited 6 times before Naruto was 7. On the 7th visit, he stayed for a month, and on the 4th day of that month he took Naruto to the harbor and showed him the sea. It was the first time Naruto had seen it, truly seen it, standing at the edge of the world with salt on his lips and the horizon stretching out in all directions. He had seen it from windows and from rooftops, but that was different. Standing at the water's edge with his father's hand on his shoulder and the whole gray-green immensity of the narrow sea laid out before him, he understood for the first time, viscerally, that this was a world built to a different scale than the one he remembered. What do you see? His father asked. His name was Viserys, not the Viserys who would sell his sister, not that one. The world had its own ways of replicating names, and he was not, Naruto had concluded, a bad man. He was a man who had been broken by specific things and had not had the help he needed to rebuild himself, and those 2 facts together made him what he was. Water, Naruto said. And beyond it, Westeros. He paused. And beyond Westeros, the places the maps get uncertain about. Viserys looked down at him. There was something on his face that might have been the beginning of a smile. You've been looking at the maps. Mother has good maps. She always did. He turned back to the water. Westeros is where your family came from. Where you come from. I know. Do you know what was lost? What was taken? Naruto considered the question. He knew the history, the Baratheon rebellion, the fall of Ares, the death of most of the Targaryen line. He knew about Viserion, about Aegon, about Riella fleeing to Dragonstone and dying bringing another child into the world. He knew about the scattered remnants of a dynasty trying to remember what it had been. I know what happened, he said. I don't think it was taken. I think it ended. His father's hand tightened on his shoulder. Not painfully, but noticeably. Things that end, Viserys said carefully, can be reclaimed. Some things, Naruto agreed. Not all things. And you have to think carefully about which ones are worth the trying. There was a long silence. A gull cried somewhere overhead. The waves came in and went out in their ancient, indifferent rhythm. You sound like an old man, Viserys said, not unkindly. I had a very educational childhood, Naruto told him. His father laughed. It was a short, surprised sound, as though laughing was something he'd lost the habit of and briefly rediscovered. Naruto filed it away, the sound of that laugh, the way his father's posture changed for a second, something looser and younger coming through, and decided that this was a person worth trying to reach, even if reaching was going to take patience. He had always been better at patience than anyone gave him credit for. He found the egg when he was 8. It was in the basement of the house, in a room that had been locked since before he was born, behind a door that was sealed with a lock too old and complicated for any key currently in the household to open. He found it because Kurama told him it was there, not in words, exactly, but in the way a compass needle finds north, a persistent pressure, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. What is that? He had asked, standing in the corridor outside the locked door, hand pressed flat against the stone. Something that's been waiting, Kurama said. Something that recognizes us. It took him 3 months to get the door open without breaking anything, because he was 8 and hadn't yet developed the kind of brute strength that would have made the problem simpler. He worked at the lock with a patience that would have surprised anyone who had known him in his previous life, trying different approaches, failing, adjusting, trying again. Mira caught him twice. Twice she pretended she hadn't. When the door finally swung open, the room behind it was cold and dark and smelled of stone and something older, a mineral smell, volcanic, like the air near a hot spring. The shelves were mostly empty. There was a chest in the corner, iron-banded and heavy, and inside the chest, wrapped in old cloth the color of embers, was an egg. It was the size of a large melon and completely, perfectly black, not the black of darkness but the black of something that contained its own light and chose not to show it. When Naruto picked it up, which he did immediately and without hesitation, it was warm in his hands. Not room temperature warm. Warm the way a living thing is warm. It pulsed, once, against his palm. "Oh," said Kurama, in a tone of voice Naruto had never heard from him before. Something between recognition and delight. "There you are." "There who is?" Naruto said aloud, to the empty room, holding the egg against his chest. The egg pulsed again. He carried it upstairs. He put it in his bed. His mother found it that evening when she came to say goodnight, and she stopped in the doorway and stared at it for a very long time with an expression he couldn't read. "Where did you get that?" she asked. "Basement," he said. "Behind the locked door. That door has been locked since before you were born." She came into the room slowly and crouched beside the bed, studying the egg without touching it. "Your father put things down there for safekeeping. Things that came with us when the family left Westeros." "It's alive," Naruto said. "Dragon eggs often retain warmth for," she started. "It's alive," he said again, not argumentatively, just as a fact. "It knows I'm here." His mother looked at him. She was 31 years old and had lived enough life for twice that, and in that moment something shifted in her expression, not surprise, exactly, but a kind of recognition. Like she had been expecting this and dreading it and somewhere underneath both of those things, hoping for it. "Don't tell your father," she said. He didn't. He also didn't hide it, exactly, he just stopped bringing it up, which was different. The egg lived on his windowsill where the morning sun could reach it, and sometimes at night it glowed, just faintly, from somewhere deep inside itself, a pulse of red gold light that was barely visible unless you were looking directly at it in the dark. Mira saw it once and left the room very quickly and never mentioned it to anyone, which Naruto appreciated. He talked to it. This was not as embarrassing as it sounded, because he had grown up talking to a 9-tailed fox living in his sternum, and the communication style was not entirely dissimilar. The egg didn't reply in words. It replied in heat, in pulse, in the particular way a warm thing presses back when you press against it. He learned its rhythms. It learned his. "It likes you," Kurama observed, with distinct amusement. "Does it know what you are?" "It knows what we are. Both of us. Together." A pause. "It's been waiting for something that matched. Nothing in this world matched until now. You were waiting for me specifically," Naruto told the egg. It pulsed, steady and warm, against his hands. "Yeah," he said. "Same." It hatched on a Tuesday in late summer, which Naruto always thought was appropriately mundane for something apocalyptic. He was 9 years old, sitting on the roof of the house in the early morning with the egg in his lap and the city spread below him, still quiet in that particular way cities are quiet before they've fully committed to the day. He had been up since before dawn because Kurama had woken him with a low hum of alertness, now, just that, not a word but a certainty, and he had climbed out his window and up to the roof with the egg because the roof was his thinking place and this felt like a moment that deserved the sky. The crack started at the top. Not a catastrophic split, more like the first hairline fracture in ice, a thin white line that Naruto watched spread slowly as the egg shifted in his hands, a movement from inside, something pressing outward. He sat very still. His heart was doing something complicated. Kurama was completely silent in a way that was somehow louder than noise. The shell came away in pieces, and what emerged was not what Naruto had expected, even though he hadn't known exactly what to expect. He had been thinking dragon in the way he'd always understood dragons, because that was what dragon eggs hatched into. But what climbed onto his knees from the wreckage of the shell, shaking fluid from scales the color of coal and sunset mixed together, was simultaneously exactly a dragon and entirely unlike any dragon this world had produced. It was small, the size of a large cat, at hatching, which was standard. But it was burning. Not on fire in the destructive sense, not yet, more like it was lit from inside, the way a lantern is lit, a deep ember glow running through the spaces between its scales. It had 9 ridges along its spine that he recognized immediately, even though he was 9 years old and trying not to cry and mostly failing at it. Its eyes, when it lifted its head and looked at him, were gold. Not amber. Gold, like something molten. It looked at him and he looked at it. "Hey," he said, voice coming out rougher than he intended. The dragon made a sound. It was somewhere between a chirp and a rumble, far too large a sound for something its size, and it walked up his chest with claws that didn't scratch, careful, deliberate, finding purchase without breaking anything, and pressed its head under his chin. He wrapped both hands around it. It burned against his palms, not painfully but definitively, the heat of a living thing, the heat of a fire that chose to be contained. "Kurama," he thought. "I know," Kurama said, very quietly. I know." He sat on the roof until the sun was properly up, holding his dragon while the city woke below him, and he thought about fire and foxes and old lives carried into new ones, and he cried a little, which was fine, because there was nobody on the roof but him and the dragon and the dawn. He named her Akane. It meant red, and she was, underneath the coal-black scales, when she breathed fire for the first time 2 days later, setting a section of the garden wall alight with an enthusiasm that significantly exceeded her size. The fire was red gold, the color of Kurama's chakra in the old world, and Naruto laughed so hard he sat down in the dirt. "You and me both," he told her. She bit his sleeve and set it on fire. He put it out by slapping it against his leg. She watched this process with evident satisfaction. "Yeah," he said. "We're going to get along great." Word reached them when Naruto was 11. His father came in the door in the afternoon with snow still on his boots even though it was not snowing season, which meant he had been riding hard from somewhere that mattered, and his face had the particular set to it that Naruto had learned to read as news that changes things. His mother was in the kitchen. Naruto was in the courtyard, sitting on the fountain's edge with Akane draped across his shoulders like a very warm, occasionally irritable scarf. She was 2 years old now, roughly the size of a large dog, and she had decided that Naruto's shoulders were her preferred territory and defended them accordingly. His father stopped when he saw the dragon. This was not the first time he'd seen Akane. He'd been visiting regularly, which had been its own kind of evolution, the visits getting longer and the conversations getting more real, but he still hadn't entirely made his peace with the fact of her. "Come inside," Viserys said. "Both of you." He glanced at Akane. "All 3 of you." They sat in the main room, his parents across from him, Akane on the table because she had decided that was appropriate and nothing had successfully convinced her otherwise. Naruto watched his father's hands, they were not still. "Your sister is in Pentos," Viserys said. Naruto had known he had a sister. He had known for a while. He hadn't pushed for information about her because he hadn't been ready for what information about her would mean, the decisions it would require, the movement it would set in motion. He had been 11 years old and some part of him had wanted just a little longer. "How old is she?" he asked. 13. Viserys met his eyes. "Her name is Daenerys. She's been living with Illyrio Mopatis in Pentos. He's been, arranging things." "What kind of things?" His father said the name. "The Dothraki. The Khal." The plan that Illyrio had been constructing like a merchant constructs a favorable trade, all advantage on one side, all risk on the other, and the person taking the risk being a 13-year-old girl who had no say in the matter. Naruto was quiet for a moment. Akane lifted her head from the table and looked at him. Her gold eyes read his face the way she always did, calibrating. "No," he said. His father blinked. "No. No. She's not being traded to a Khal like livestock." He said it without heat, without drama, the way you say a thing you have already decided is true. "I'll go to Pentos. I'll meet her. We'll figure out the next part from there." "You're 11, his father said. "I'm also the only person in this family with a dragon," Naruto said. "Which changes the math considerably." There was a silence. His mother was looking at him with the expression she had started wearing more often lately, the one where she was seeing something in him that she didn't quite have a name for yet, something that had outgrown the frame she'd built for it. His father was doing something more complicated, processing, revising, landing somewhere between apprehension and a reluctant, wondering pride. "Illyrio is a powerful man," his father said finally. "I'm sure he is," Naruto agreed. "He can still be wrong." Another silence. Akane chirped, soft and low. "There's something else," his father said. "News from Westeros." He paused, and when he spoke again his voice had dropped to a register that people use when they're saying something they've been afraid to say out loud. "Robert Baratheon is not well. The rumors are, he may not last another year. And when he dies, whatever he's been holding together goes with him." Naruto looked at his father. Looked at his mother. Looked at the map on the wall that she had drawn years ago, the one with the coast of Westeros traced in her careful hand. "Then we shouldn't take too long," he said. He was 11 years old, and he was not afraid, and that was the truest thing about him. He left 3 months later, after the summer had turned and the first edge of autumn was in the air. His mother held him at the gate of the house for a long time, longer than was probably necessary, and he let her because she needed it and because he wasn't sure he didn't need it too. She pressed a kiss to the top of his head and said something in Valyrian that was a blessing so old he'd had to look it up, not in any book in the house, but in his own memory, from the fragments of old Valyrian culture that Kurama had absorbed in that long quiet time before he was born. "Fire and blood remember you," it meant, roughly. "Walk forward." He walked forward. Akane flew overhead, still too young to carry him but perfectly capable of flying independently and extremely unwilling to be left behind. She circled once, twice, then fell into a lazy spiral above him as he walked, a coal dark shape against the pale autumn sky, trailing a faint thread of smoke from her nostrils. Mira walked with him to the first gate of the city. At the gate, she stopped, and she gripped his shoulder with one broad hand, and she looked at him with those eyes that never gave anything away and were giving everything away right now. "Don't do anything stupid," she said. "I'll try," he said. "You won't succeed," she said. "Probably not," he agreed. She released his shoulder and turned back toward the house without another word, because Mira was constitutionally incapable of drawn-out goodbyes, and Naruto watched her go and felt the particular weight of a door closing behind you, not sad, exactly, but real, the way real things are heavy with their own specific gravity. Then he turned to the road, and he walked. "Ready?" Kurama asked. "Been ready," Naruto said. Overhead, Akane called once, sharp and clear as a bell, and banked south toward Pentos. He followed. Chapter 2, Silver and Smoke. Pentos smelled like money and rot in roughly equal measure. Naruto noticed this the moment he came through the city gates, the particular combination of spiced perfume, salt air, dockside fish, and the subtler smell underneath all of it, the one that cities get when wealth has been sitting in one place long enough to start fermenting. He had been in free cities before, smaller ones, trading towns where the ambition was proportionate to the size. Pentos was something else. Pentos was a city that had convinced itself it was civilized by building large enough walls to keep the evidence to the contrary outside them. He was 11 years old and he walked in through the main gate with a travel pack on his back and a dragon the size of a large dog circling 50 feet overhead, and the gate guard stared at him with the particular expression of men whose job description had not prepared them for this specific situation. Visiting, Naruto told them, which was technically true. They let him through. People generally did, when Akane was visible. He found Illyrio Mopatis's manse without much trouble because it was the kind of house that wasn't trying to be subtle about anything, 3 stories of pale marble and gilded ironwork, large enough to qualify as a small palace, set back from the road behind gardens that were clearly maintained by someone who took gardens seriously as a form of self-expression. Naruto stood outside the gates and looked at it for a moment. "Feels like a trap," Kurama said. "Everything in this city feels like a trap," Naruto replied. "That's kind of the whole brand." He knocked on the gate. A servant appeared, looked at him, looked up at Akane, looked back at him. "I'm here to see my sister," Naruto said, in the common tongue, because he had found that using the right language communicated intent in ways that words alone sometimes didn't. "Daenerys Targaryen. Tell Illyrio that her brother is here." "The other brother." The servant disappeared. Naruto sat down on a stone bench beside the gate and ate an apple from his pack. Akane landed on top of the gatepost and folded her wings with the studied dignity of someone who considered roosting to be beneath them but was doing it anyway. Several minutes passed. Then the gate opened. The man who came out to receive him was enormous, not merely large but architectural, the kind of man who takes up space the way a building does, with layers of fat that moved with their own momentum and a beard that would have been impressive on a smaller face. Illyrio Mopatis looked at Naruto with small, clever eyes that were doing a great deal of rapid calculation behind a practiced expression of warm welcome. "Young prince," he said, opening his arms in a gesture of hospitality that encompassed the entire courtyard. "This isn't unexpected, I know about the Dothraki plan," Naruto said. Illyrio's arms came down slowly. "I know about Khal Drogo," Naruto continued, standing up from the bench and brushing apple from his fingers. "I know you've been arranging a marriage contract for Daenerys that she doesn't know the full terms of. I know you're expecting an army in exchange for a girl who is 13 years old." He looked at Illyrio with the direct, unhurried gaze that had unnerved people 3 times his age. "I'm not here to be hostile about it. I'm just letting you know up front that it's not happening." There was a silence. Above them, Akane shifted on the gatepost and the glow between her scales pulsed once, warm and visible even in daylight. Illyrio found his composure with the speed of a man who had been in unexpected situations before and had survived them all through a combination of money, intelligence, and the willingness to immediately revise his position. "You are very direct for someone your age," he said. "I'm told it's one of my better qualities," Naruto said. "Can I see my sister now?" Daenerys was in the garden. She was sitting on a stone bench between 2 flowering trees, and she was reading, and she did not look up immediately when Naruto came through the garden door because she had the focused stillness of someone who had learned to extract as much peace as possible from whatever peaceful moments were available to them. She was 13 and silver-haired, and there was something in the set of her shoulders that he recognized, not from his previous life, but from years of watching his mother, that particular way of holding yourself when you have been carrying something heavy long enough that your posture has adjusted to accommodate it. He stopped a few feet away and waited. She looked up. Her eyes were violet, the proper Targaryen violet, and they moved across him quickly and thoroughly in the way smart people catalog new information. "You're Naruto," she said. It was not a question. "Yeah," he said. "Father mentioned you." Her voice was careful, precise. "He said you had." She looked past him, and her expression changed completely, the carefulness dissolving into something unguarded and bright as Akane pushed through the garden door and immediately began investigating a flower bed with her nose. "Is that a dragon?" "Her name is Akane." Daenerys stood up from the bench, the book forgotten, and she crossed the garden in a way that was trying very hard to be dignified and not quite succeeding because she was 13 and there was a dragon in the flower bed. She stopped an arm's length from Akane, who looked up from the flowers, assessed the newcomer with gold eyes, and then, to Naruto's genuine surprise, because Akane had never done this with anyone but him, pushed her nose forward into Daenerys's outstretched hand. Daenerys made a sound that was approximately the opposite of composed. She's warm, she breathed. She's always warm, Naruto said. It's like carrying a furnace around. Very useful in winter. Daenerys ran her hand along Akane's neck, slow and wondering, and Akane made her low rumbling sound, the content one, the one she reserved for moments she had decided were acceptable. Naruto watched his sister's face. The guarded thing was still there underneath, but right now it was taking a break. She likes you, he said. I've never, Daenerys started, then stopped, collecting herself, rebuilding a little bit of the careful shell. The eggs were cold. Illyrio gave me 3 eggs, for the wedding, and they were, she stopped again. Tell me about the wedding, Naruto said, not gently but directly, because gentle had a way of letting people avoid things and she deserved better than avoidance. She told him. Not everything, not immediately, it came in pieces over the next hour, sitting in the garden with Akane between them like a warm, self-heating bridge, the story assembling itself from the fragments she'd been given. Khal Drogo. The Dothraki. Illyrio's plan to trade her for an army, dressed up in the language of alliances and destiny and the rightful return of the Targaryen dynasty to Westeros. She said destiny the way someone says a word they've heard so many times it's lost its meaning, and Naruto caught it. Do you want to go back, he asked. To Westeros. Not for Illyrio, not for anyone's plan. Do you want it? The question landed visibly. She looked at him with an expression that was something between startled and suspicious, as though what do you want was a question she'd been asked so rarely she wasn't sure how to answer honestly. I want people to be safe, she said, slowly, working it out as she said it. I've heard stories about what it was like, before. When the Targaryens ruled well. I want that to mean something. It means something, Naruto said. But it doesn't mean you get traded to a Khal to get it. She looked at him. Then what does it mean? I'm still figuring that out, he said honestly. But I know what it doesn't mean. That's a start. Akane put her head in Daenerys's lap. Daenerys looked down at her and something in her face went soft in a way she probably didn't know was visible. You've only just arrived, she said. I know. You've already told Illyrio the plan is off. Told him it's not happening, Naruto confirmed. A pause. How did he respond? He smiled a lot and used very expensive words, Naruto said. I think he's going to try to find a different angle. He's not someone who lets go of leverage easily. He looked at the garden wall, at the top of the manse visible over it, the gilded ironwork of the upper floors catching the afternoon sun. He's not a bad person, by the way. He's just a person who's decided that moving other people around a board is the same thing as caring about them. Daenerys was quiet for a moment. That's a very generous interpretation. I tend toward generous, he said. It makes people uncomfortable. That earned him something that was almost a smile, the edge of one, quickly reined back in. But it had been there. I don't know you, she said. I know, he said. That's okay. We have time. They were given rooms in the manse, because Illyrio was not the kind of man who made his disagreements into open conflicts when there was another option. He recalibrated. You could almost watch him do it, the way his expression recalibrated by millimeters when he thought nobody was paying attention, the way he asked questions that were shaped like conversation but were actually reconnaissance. Naruto answered everything directly, which visibly frustrated Illyrio in ways he was far too practiced to show directly, and ate his meals with the enthusiasm of someone who has been eating road food for 3 weeks and has strong feelings about hot meals and cheese. On the third night, Illyrio hosted a dinner. He invited several guests, merchants, a magistrate, a man who was introduced as a trader but moved like something else entirely. Naruto sat at the table in clean clothes his mother had packed for exactly this kind of occasion and watched everybody with the pleasant, slightly unfocused expression he had learned to deploy when he wanted people to underestimate how much attention he was paying. The man who moved like something else was watching him. Not constantly, not obviously, but with the particular discipline of someone who had trained themselves not to look directly at things they were very interested in. He was average in every way that mattered for going unnoticed, average height, average build, average coloring, but his hands were wrong. They were the hands of someone who had spent a very long time doing things with them that required precision and silence. Spy, Kurama said, confirming what Naruto had already filed under probable. Whose? Based on the way he positioned himself between you and the 3 exits? Not Illyrio's. Someone wanted information about us specifically. The dinner progressed. There was wine, which Naruto didn't drink because he was 11 and had no interest in dulling his attention, and there was a great deal of conversation about trade and weather and the kind of thing people talk about at dinners when what they're actually doing is talking about none of those things. Daenerys sat 2 seats down from him, and he watched her navigate the room, the way she answered questions with exactly enough warmth to seem open while giving away nothing, the way she tracked the conversations happening at the other end of the table simultaneously. He was realizing, considerably more capable than anyone in this house had taken the time to notice. After dinner, in the corridor outside the dining room, he fell into step beside the average man. You work for the small council, Naruto said, conversationally, as they walked. Or you did, before whoever currently runs the small council decided this particular intelligence gathering was better done off the books. The man kept walking. His face did nothing. His hands, briefly, tightened. I'm not telling you to stop, Naruto said. I'm just letting you know that I know, so we don't have to do the whole performance where you pretend to be a merchant and I pretend to believe you. That seems like a waste of both our time. He stopped walking and turned to face the man, who stopped as well. Go back to whoever sent you and tell them that the remaining Targaryens are in Pentos, that we have a dragon, and that we have no current plans to invade anything. Also tell them that if they send someone to do something rather than just watch, I will be less friendly about it. A long pause. The corridor was lit by wall sconces, the light warm and still. You're 11 years old, the man said. It was the first thing he'd said directly to Naruto all evening. People keep saying that like it explains something, Naruto said. Have a good evening. He walked back to his room. Behind him, he heard nothing. The man was good, but he felt the weight of being watched all the way to his door. You enjoyed that, Kurama said. Little bit, Naruto admitted. Don't get cocky. I thought you liked me better when I was confident. Confident and cocky are different things. Confident is knowing what you can do. Cocky is forgetting what you can't. Naruto opened his door. Akane was on his bed, taking up considerably more space than her size warranted. She looked at him with gold eyes. Yeah, he said, I know. Daenerys came to his room the following morning before breakfast, which he appreciated because it meant she'd decided something and wasn't second-guessing it into the afternoon. She came in without knocking, which he also appreciated. Akane raised her head, decided Daenerys was acceptable, and went back to sleep. I want to learn, Daenerys said, standing in the doorway with the morning light behind her and a directness in her voice that suited her far better than the careful neutrality of the dinner table. Whatever it is you're doing, the way you read people, the way you knew about Illyrio's plan, the way you spoke to that man last night, I want to learn it. Naruto, who was eating breakfast on the window seat, considered this. I can teach you some of it, he said. Some of it you already know. You've just been taught to pretend you don't, because knowing things is inconvenient when you're supposed to be an asset. She flinched, small and controlled. He'd said it plainly, not cruelly, and he watched her decide to receive it the way it was meant rather than the way it could have been taken. Yes, she said. Sit down, he said, gesturing at the other end of the window seat. Tell me everything you know about Westeros. Not the official version, the real one. The geography, the houses, the politics, the relationships. All of it. She sat. She talked. For 2 hours she laid out the political landscape of the 7 kingdoms with a thoroughness and precision that confirmed what he'd suspected. She had been preparing, quietly, on her own, for a very long time. She knew the histories, the feuds, the marriages, the allegiances, and the gaps between what alliances were publicly acknowledged and what they actually meant. She knew it all because she had read everything she could find and listened to every conversation she wasn't supposed to hear, and she had assembled a picture of Westeros from fragments the way you assemble a mosaic, piece by piece in the dark. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "What?" she said. "You're really good," he said. She blinked. You've been doing political analysis at a level that most small council members couldn't match, on your own, without anyone teaching you, for years." He said it plainly. "Nobody's told you that." "Nobody was," she stopped. Started again. "I was supposed to be a marriage pawn. Useful, presentable, controllable. Being good at things wasn't." "Well," Naruto said, "you are. And that changes what's possible." He picked up the last of his bread. "Now tell me about the Dothraki, specifically. Not the marriage plan. The Dothraki themselves, their culture, what they value, how their society works." She told him. And while she talked, he started to see the shape of the next step, the beginning of the road that they were both already on, whether they'd chosen it consciously or not. "You have a plan," Kurama said. "Starting to," Naruto replied. "Want to share it?" "Not yet. It's still more of a direction than a plan." "Ah," said Kurama. "Your favorite kind." On the seventh day, Kurama woke fully. It wasn't a gradual thing. One moment Naruto was sitting in the garden in the early dark, unable to sleep, listening to the city, and then there was a shift, tectonic, internal, and the presence in his chest that had always been warm and familiar became something enormously, powerfully there in a way that was different from before. Like a coal becoming a sun. Like a match becoming a bonfire. He didn't fall over. He had experienced worse in his previous life, and his body, young as it was built for this in a way that an ordinary person's would not have been. He pressed his back against the garden wall and breathed through it, steady, and in his chest Kurama stretched, there was no other word for it, stretched the way something stretches after being compressed for a very long time. "Kurama. I'm here." The voice was different. Not in quality, still the same dry, ancient intelligence he had always known, but in volume, in presence. Like someone had been speaking through a wall and suddenly the wall was gone. "The world here has more energy. Different from chakra but related. I've been absorbing it. You've been absorbing the ambient magic of this world while I was growing up. You were asleep for several hours each night. I had to do something productive. Is that safe? For me? Yes. For anyone who threatens you? Considerably less so." A pause. "I'm stronger here than I was in our old world, Naruto. Not because this world is more powerful. Because I'm no longer divided." Naruto thought about that. In the old world, Kurama had been split, young Kurama sealed in Naruto, in Kurama elsewhere. The split had been healed eventually, but this was different. This was a Kurama who had come into a new world whole, and had been quietly, patiently growing since before Naruto was born. "How much stronger?" Naruto asked. There was a quality to the silence that followed that he could only describe as Kurama deciding how honest to be. "There is nothing in this world that can match me," Kurama said. "Not the armies. Not the sorcerers. Not whatever cold thing is building itself in the north. I am, in this world, effectively without limit. That's terrifying." I was going to say good news. Naruto leaned his head back against the garden wall. "But yeah, also terrifying. For other people. I won't act without you," Kurama said. "I never did. I won't start now. I know. You are still the one who decides," Kurama said, and there was something in his voice that was as close to tender as Kurama got, which meant it was gruff and slightly irritable and still completely unmistakable. "That hasn't changed. Naruto sat in the dark garden and felt the weight of this, the reality of what he carried, what they were together, in this world that had no reference point for it. Not a Jinchuriki and a tailed beast. Not even a boy and his dragon. Something older than either of those things, a partnership forged through pain and stubbornness and the slow, irreversible process of choosing each other so many times that the choice had become structural, load-bearing. Akane landed on his knee without warning, light-footed, and looked at his face with her gold eyes. She made the soft chirp that meant what's wrong. Nothing's wrong, he said. Everything just got more real. She headbutted his chin and set his collar briefly on fire. Thanks, he said, patting it out. That helps. The confrontation with Illyrio came on the 9th day, and Naruto had not started it but was entirely unsurprised when it began. He had been sitting in on Illyrio's meetings, not invited, exactly, but not prevented, in the same way a river is not precisely invited into a valley but the valley doesn't prevent it. He had been there when the raven arrived from Volantis. He had been there when Illyrio spoke to his steward afterward in a lowered voice about arrangements and the original plan, and the boy is a complication but a manageable one. He had been there for all of it, quiet at the corner of the room, eating a fig from the fruit bowl with the focused attention of someone doing nothing at all. Illyrio waited until after supper on the 9th day, when Daenerys had gone to bed and the household had settled, before calling Naruto into his study. The study was a masterwork of implied power. Heavy furniture, wall-to-wall shelves of ledgers and letters that represented decades of carefully constructed influence, a desk the size of a small ship. Sit, Illyrio said, from behind the desk. Naruto sat. I have been patient, Illyrio began, and his voice had dropped the warmth from it, the hospitality voice gone, the real one underneath, still measured but carrying a different weight. I have welcomed you into my home. I have not pressed you on your objections to the arrangement with Khal Drogo, because I assumed that given time, you would come to understand why the arrangement is necessary. I understand why you think it's necessary, Naruto said. I don't agree. The Targaryens need an army, the Targaryens need allies, Naruto said. There's a difference. An army you buy with a girl is not an army that stays bought. A Khal's loyalty lasts exactly as long as the Khal decides it lasts, and you know that better than I do, because you've been operating in this part of the world for long enough to understand how Dothraki power works. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Illyrio. You're smart. That's not flattery, I mean it, you're genuinely very smart. But you've been running this particular game for so long that you've started seeing the people in it as pieces. Daenerys is not a piece. Illyrio's fingers drummed once on the desk. She understands the necessity. She is willing. She is 13 years old and she has been told her whole life that her purpose is to reclaim a throne for a dynasty she didn't choose to be born into. Willing isn't the same as choosing freely. He kept his voice level. I'm not asking you to abandon the goal. I'm telling you we're doing it differently. You, Illyrio said, with a deliberateness that was its own kind of emphasis, are 11 years old. You have a dragon that is 2 years old and the size of a large dog. You have no army, no ships, no money beyond what you've traveled with, and no political backing from any house in Westeros. With what, precisely, do you plan to change the outcome of this situation? Naruto smiled at him. It was the smile that Sakura had once described as profoundly unsettling in the way of someone who knows exactly where they're going and is happy about it. With the next 3 years, he said. Give me 3 years. Keep Daenerys here, safe, not contracted to anyone, and in 3 years I will have everything you just listed and more. Illyrio stared at him. Also, Naruto added, the thing in the north is real. The cold thing. The dead thing. Whatever your sources have told you about it, multiply it. That changes the timeline for everyone, which means the plan you've been running for the last decade is already outdated and you probably already know that. The room was very quiet. Illyrio, to his credit, did not dismiss this. His eyes moved across Naruto's face with the particular focus of a man updating his internal models in real time. Your sources, he said carefully, regarding the north. My source is approximately 10,000 years old and pays very close attention, Naruto said. I'll leave it there. Another silence, longer this time. 3 years, Illyrio said. 3 years. And if you cannot deliver in 3 years? Naruto looked at him. Then we reassess. But I will. Illyrio's eyes moved to the window, through which, if you looked at the right angle and the night was clear enough, you could see a shape circling in the dark sky above the garden, a coal-black shadow against the stars, occasionally illuminated from within by a pulse of red-gold light. 3 years, he said again, quietly, as if testing the weight of it. 3 years, Naruto agreed. He stood up. Good night, Illyrio. He left the study. In the corridor, he exhaled slowly and rolled his neck, and Kurama made a sound in his chest that was equal parts amusement and pride. You're planning to move faster than 3 years, Kurama said. Probably, Naruto agreed. You lied to him. I told him what he needed to hear to keep him from making a move I'd have to stop more directly. He started toward the stairs. 3 years is the outside limit. I'm thinking more like 1. And in 1 year, what exactly? The window at the end of the corridor was open, and through it came Akane, which should not have been physically possible given the window's dimensions, but Akane had opinions about geometry that weren't always shared by the architecture. She landed on his shoulder, claws careful, and pressed her warm nose against his cheek. He reached up and scratched behind her ear. 1 year, he said quietly, to both of them. And then we move. Outside, Pentos hummed and glittered, indifferent to everything, a city that had survived 100 schemes and 100 schemers and was not particularly worried about one more. But Naruto wasn't a schemer, and the city didn't know yet that that was the thing that made the difference. The night sky was enormous. The stars were out. Somewhere beyond the narrow sea, a kingdom was pulling itself apart, and the dead were walking north of a great wall of ice, and a throne built of swords was waiting for someone to decide what it was worth. He looked at the stars for a moment, really looked at them, in the way you look at a destination you can see but haven't started walking toward yet. I know, he told the night. He went to bed. Chapter 3, The Dragons Rode the Dothraki Sea was nothing like the sea. Naruto had expected something, grassland, obviously, flat and wide, he knew the geography, but knowing a thing and standing inside it were different, and standing in the middle of the Dothraki Sea at dawn with the grass running to every horizon in unbroken gold-green waves was something that bypassed description entirely and went straight to the chest. It was enormous in the way that very few things were genuinely enormous. The sky above it was twice as big as any sky had a right to be. Akane, flying overhead, looked genuinely happy for the first time since she'd been hatched in a city garden. She banked and rolled in the thermals with an abandon that she never showed over Pentos, where buildings made the air tight and complicated. Out here she could open her wings fully and climb until she was a dark speck against the pale morning sky, and she did exactly that, repeatedly, with what Naruto could only describe as enthusiasm. She's grown, Daenerys said, riding beside him on a gray mare. 3 feet in 8 months, Naruto said. I think the travel helped. More space to move. Akane was now roughly the size of a large horse, and the size mattered because it had changed the way the world responded to them. In Pentos, she had been remarkable, a curiosity that people stared at and occasionally tried to negotiate over. Out here, 3 days into the Dothraki Sea with the Khalsar of Khal Jakko visible as a dust cloud several miles to their east, remarkable was insufficient. What she was out here was mythological, and the Dothraki response to the mythological was different from the Free City response. Less business. More awe. More respect. Which had been part of the calculation. It had been 10 months since the night in Illyrio's study, which meant Naruto was 12 now, and the 1 year he'd privately promised himself had been revised to as soon as possible after a raven arrived from Westeros 3 months ago with news that Robert Baratheon had died, boar hunting, apparently, which was undignified in a way that was somehow fitting, and the realm had immediately begun the process of tearing itself apart in the way realms do when the single person holding them, Together stops doing it. He had told Daenerys the morning the raven arrived. She had read the message twice, folded it carefully, and then said, "We need to move." Not "I told you so," not "what do we do," just a clear-eyed assessment of the changed timeline. He had revised his opinion of her upward again, which was something he found himself doing regularly. They had left Pentos 2 weeks later. Not with Illyrio's plan, not with a marriage contract, not as a transaction, but with his grudging support, which Naruto had secured through a combination of direct conversation, the implicit argument of Akane's continued growth, and the undeniable fact that the board had changed and Illyrio's old plan was now more outdated than he'd already admitted. He had provided horses, supplies, and a letter of introduction to several blood riders he had dealings with. It was not everything, but it was enough to start. Daenerys had spent the 10 months learning. She had absorbed everything Naruto offered her and then gone looking for more: language, history, horsemanship, the political structures of the Khalasars, the cultural codes that determined respect and dishonor among the Dothraki. She was still 14 and still carried herself with the careful shell she'd built over years of being handled like a commodity, but underneath it, Naruto could see the person she was becoming with the particular clarity of someone who had watched a lot of people find themselves. She was going to be extraordinary. He was quietly sure of that. What she was not, and what he had been clear about from the beginning, was bait. They met the outriders of Khal Jakko's Khalsar on the 3rd afternoon. There were 6 of them, and they rode the way the Dothraki always rode, like the horses were extensions of themselves, which they more or less were, born on horseback and never entirely comfortable off it. They came out of the grass at a canter and formed a loose arc in front of the small party: Naruto, Daenerys, and 4 guards that Illyrio had insisted on and that Naruto had accepted because sending them back would have offended the man, and the guards themselves seemed perfectly decent. The outriders looked at the party with the flat assessment of people who were very good at quickly deciding what something was worth. Their eyes moved across Daenerys, silver hair, obvious, a Westerosi noblewoman, that registered, and then moved to Naruto, and stopped. Not at him specifically. Above him. Akane had dropped from altitude when the outriders appeared and was now circling at about 100 feet, close enough that the pulse of her inner fire was visible as a rhythm of warm light between her scales, the way a heartbeat is visible in a wrist. She was not threatening. She was simply present, and her presence in this sky, above this grass, was the kind of thing that landed in the chest before the brain caught up with it. The lead outrider said something in Dothraki that Naruto caught about 60% of. His Dothraki was still developing, though the development had been fast in the way that things developed when you were motivated, and also had the subconscious assistance of someone very old who had absorbed a great deal of linguistic information from ambient cultural memory. "He's asking what you are," Daenerys translated quietly, because her Dothraki was better than his. "I understood that part," Naruto said. He looked at the outrider directly and answered in Dothraki that was grammatically imperfect but phonetically confident. "I am Naruto of House Targaryen. This is my sister. The dragon is mine." He paused, then added the phrase he'd practiced specifically for this moment, because context and framing were 90% of a first impression. "We ride to speak with the Khal. We bring no war. We bring fire." There was a silence. The outriders looked at each other with the quick sideways communication of people who had worked together long enough to hold conversations without speaking. Then one of them, younger, with braids that indicated fewer kills than the lead rider, said something, and the others laughed, and Daenerys made a small tight sound that was not quite suppressed. "What did he say?" Naruto asked. "He said the silver boy and his fire lizard should go back to his mother's house." Naruto considered this for a moment. Then he put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled, high and sharp. Akane folded her wings and dropped. She did not drop slowly, the way a bird drops when it's gliding. She dropped the way a stone drops, which is to say she committed to the process entirely and without reservation, and she pulled up at the last possible second in a move that displaced enough air to genuinely stagger 2 of the horses. The wind from her wings hit the outriders like a physical thing. She landed in the grass 15 feet in front of the lead rider's horse, which immediately tried to go somewhere else and was only prevented by the rider's extraordinary horsemanship, and she folded her wings and stood there in the grass and looked at the lead outrider with her gold eyes from a distance of roughly 30 feet. Then she breathed. Not a stream of fire, nothing destructive, nothing threatening. She breathed the way a smith's forge breathes when the bellows are worked, a column of red-gold heat that scorched the grass in front of her in a neat semicircle and produced a wave of warmth that the outriders felt on their faces from 15 feet away. The fire was exactly the color of Kurama's chakra, deep red with gold at the edges, and it burned with the particular quality of something that was not ordinary fire, not the combustion of a chemical reaction but something more fundamental, more alive. The grass where she'd breathed was still glowing. The outriders' horses were trying very hard to leave. The outriders themselves were staying, not without effort, but staying, because they were, whatever else could be said about them, completely committed to not showing fear in front of strangers. But the young one who had made the joke was not laughing anymore, and the lead rider's hands on his reins were slightly tighter than they'd been before. "Tell him," Naruto said to Daenerys, still in a conversational tone, "that we'd still like to speak with the Khal. Today, if possible." Khal Jacko's camp was vast in the way that things are vast when you've never conceived of a camp being that size. It was less a camp than a city that had decided to retain the option of moving, thousands of people, thousands of horses, the smell of cook fires and leather and the particular earthy richness of a large number of animals in proximity. The noise of it hit Naruto before they cleared the last rise, a rolling sound like weather. He had expected to be held at the perimeter. He had expected to wait, to be assessed, to be made to demonstrate patience and deference before being admitted to the Khal's presence, because that was how hierarchical cultures generally worked and the Dothraki were exceptionally hierarchical in the specific way that societies built on physical power tended to be. What he had not entirely expected was the crowd. Word traveled fast in a Khalsar. By the time they reached the outer edge of the camp, people had come out to look, not a formal reception, just people appearing at the edges of their awareness, a cluster here and a cluster there, and then more, until there was a loose corridor of people watching them ride in, and every eye in that corridor was moving between Daenerys and Akane and Naruto in a calculation he could feel without being able to fully parse. Akane walked beside his horse. She had decided, apparently, that she was done flying for the moment, and she walked with the particular ground-covering stride of something that was still getting comfortable with how large it had become, her shoulder at Naruto's stirrup, her tail moving in slow sweeps. The glow between her scales was steady and visible in the late afternoon light, and the crowd parted in front of her without anyone giving an instruction to do so. Khal Jacko was a large man even by Dothraki standards, the kind of large that spoke to a lifetime of absolute physical dominance over everyone in his immediate environment. His braid was long and heavy with bells, which meant his kills were numerous enough to be their own kind of statement. He was sitting outside his tent when they arrived, on a chair that was not quite a throne but was arranged to function as one, and he was watching their approach with the focused stillness of a predator that hasn't yet decided whether something is food or fellow predator. Naruto dismounted. He did not bow, because he had thought carefully about the gesture that would establish the right register for this conversation, and bowing was not it. He stood straight and met the Khal's eyes directly, which was the Dothraki equivalent of saying "I consider myself your equal," which was either an insult or a provocation or both, depending on how the next 30 seconds went. The Khal's blood riders tensed. Several hands moved toward weapons. Naruto waited. Khal Jacko looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Akane, who had come to stand beside Naruto with the easy, possessive proximity of a dog standing by its person, except that Akane was the size of a horse and burning from the inside and the nearest bloodrider's mount was trying to sidestep away from her without being obvious about it. The Khal said something. His voice was deep and moved through the air with the weight of a man who had not had to raise it in years. The translator, a small, quick-eyed man at the Khal's shoulder, said, in accented common tongue, he asks, "Is the dragon yours, or are you the dragon's?" Naruto considered the question. It was, he thought, a better question than most people would have asked. "Yes," he said. The translator looked confused. The Khal, who apparently didn't need the translation to understand the tone of it, made a sound, not quite a laugh, but adjacent to one, something that acknowledged an answer that had been given on purpose. He said something else. He asks where you ride, the translator said. West, Naruto said. Across the narrow sea. To a kingdom that's forgotten what fire is. The translation happened. The Khal listened to it. He looked at Naruto again with that focused, assessing stillness. He's deciding, Kurama said. I know. Don't do anything dramatic. I never do anything dramatic. You literally once leveled a mountain. That was necessary. The Khal stood. He was extremely tall when he stood. He came down the 3 steps from the tent platform and crossed the space between them until he was standing 6 feet from Naruto, and he looked down at him with the thorough, clinical attention of a man evaluating something he might want to own. Then he reached out and took Naruto's face in one hand, not gently, the grip of it was frank and strong, and tilted it slightly, examining the whisker marks on his cheeks with the focused curiosity of someone who had seen a lot of things and was encountering something new. Naruto didn't pull back. He let the examination happen. Beside him, Akane made a low sound, not threatening, but present, making herself heard. The Khal released him. He said 3 words, and the camp was quiet enough that they carried. What did he say? Naruto asked, without looking away from the Khal. Daenerys, from behind him, translated in a voice that was very carefully controlled, he said, the marks of a predator. The Khal turned and walked back to his chair. He sat. He said something longer, and the translator relayed it in pieces. He says you are welcome in the camp of Khal Jacko. He says his riders saw the dragon above the grass 2 days ago and he has been waiting. He says, the translator paused, as if double-checking the words, he says that a boy who rides with a dragon and does not pretend the dragon is a horse is a boy worth knowing. Naruto let out a breath. Tell him I feel the same way about him, he said. A man who asks the right question is a man worth talking to. The translation happened. Jacko's eyes moved with something that might have been appreciation. Not bad, Kurama said. I had help with the Dothraki attitude research. You're welcome. They stayed 5 days. It was not what Naruto had planned, exactly, he had planned 2, maybe 3, but the 5 days assembled themselves with a logic he couldn't argue with. On the first day, he was a curiosity. On the second, after a training session that happened somewhat organically when one of the Blood Riders made an offhand remark about whether a silver boy who didn't carry an arak could actually fight, he became something different. The Blood Rider's name was Koro, and he was fast, genuinely fast, the kind of fast that came from a lifetime of combat training starting before the age of reason. He was also a full foot taller than Naruto and outweighed him by several times and had agreed to a sparring match in what was clearly a spirit of friendly condescension. He threw the first strike with the speed and precision of long practice. Naruto wasn't there when it arrived. He had moved, not dramatically, not a leap or a roll, but a small, exact displacement, the kind that required you to have read the strike before it was thrown. Koro's fist went through empty air and he turned to find Naruto standing 2 feet to his left with a mildly interested expression. Koro threw 4 more strikes in quick succession, testing, calibrating, not embarrassed yet but becoming focused. Naruto slipped 2, deflected 1, and redirected the 4th with a hand placement that used Koro's own momentum to turn him halfway around. The crowd that had gathered, and it had gathered quickly, because in a culture that valued combat, a training match drew people the way fire drew moths, went quiet. Koro came at him properly after that. No more testing. He was good, Naruto acknowledged internally, he was very good, the product of a culture that treated fighting as sacred and practiced it with the seriousness of a religion. He was fast and strong and adaptable and he adjusted his approach 3 times in the first 2 minutes based on what Naruto was showing him. The problem was that what Naruto was showing him was approximately 40% of what he could do, and even that 40% was built on a foundation that this world had never seen. Not just technique, though the taijutsu was decades ahead of anything the Dothraki had encountered, but understanding, the deep structural understanding of combat that came from having fought things that could crack mountains. Koro was an excellent fighter operating inside the limits of what human training could produce. Naruto was a different category. He ended it without hurting Koro, which mattered. He got inside the larger man's guard, used a foot placement that interrupted his balance at a structural level, and brought him down in a way that was controlled and complete and gave Koro no recovery option that didn't involve accepting the ground. Then he stepped back and offered his hand. Koro looked up at him from the dirt. Then he laughed, a real laugh, deep and genuine, the laugh of someone who has been genuinely surprised. He took Naruto's hand and came up, and he said something to the crowd in Dothraki that Naruto didn't fully catch, but the response was unmistakable. He said, Daenerys told him later, quietly, that you fight like the grass runs. He meant it as high praise. I know, Naruto said. The grass doesn't fight what it can't beat. It bends. She looked at him. You understand them better than you let on. I understand people, he said. The specific flavoring changes. The basic recipe is usually similar. On the third day, Jacko invited him to eat, which was different from being permitted to stay. It was an active claim of welcome, a status elevation, and the camp responded to it with the precise social recalibration of a community that expressed hierarchy through every gesture. On the fourth day, 2 younger riders came to him separately and asked, through a combination of Dothraki and gestures, if he would show them the foot placement from the sparring match. He showed them. They came back with 3 friends. By the 5th morning, he had something that Illyrio's gold had never been able to buy, genuine respect, in a culture that did not give it for any currency except the one it actually valued. He and Daenerys sat with Jacko on the morning of the 5th day, and they talked. Not about armies, not about thrones, those words never appeared, because Naruto had learned long ago that you didn't open a conversation about what you needed. You opened it about what you saw. The cold thing in the north, Naruto said. Your outriders in the far northeast of the grass, have they seen things? Strange things. Jacko's expression shifted. He said something to a blood rider, low and quick. He asks how you know about this, Daenerys said. Because it's real and it's coming and it doesn't care about Khalasars any more than it cares about stone kingdoms. Naruto held Jacko's eyes. I'm not asking for an army, Khal. I'm telling you the truth, so that when the time comes, you know who told you first. A long pause. Jacko looked at him with an expression that had moved past assessment into something more like genuine reckoning. He spoke for a long time. The translator worked steadily. He says his outriders have found villages at the far edge of the grass, north and east, where the Lazarene live. Empty villages. Not burned. Not raided. Just empty, as if the people walked out and did not come back. He says his shamans have been speaking of cold that comes without winter for 6 months. He says, the translator paused, he says that a man who names the thing that everyone else is pretending is not there is either a great fool or something more than a man. I'm definitely not a great fool, Naruto said. Jacko looked at him. Then he said something short and final, the tone of a decision made. He says, Daenerys translated herself, setting aside the formal translator with the authority of someone who had decided this mattered enough to be exact, that when you cross the water and light the sky on fire, his riders will remember who burned it. And debts are paid. It was not an alliance. It was not a contract. It was something older than both of those things, a statement of witness, a promise of memory. In Dothraki culture, it was the foundation that alliances were built on, and Naruto recognized it for what it was. Tell him, Naruto said, that I'll hold the sky open long enough for anyone who wants to come through. They were 2 days back toward the coast when Daenerys pulled her horse alongside his in the late evening, the sky going spectacular colors over the western grass, and said, You didn't tell him what we actually want. I told him what's true, Naruto said. You didn't tell him about Westeros. About the throne. No. Why? He thought about how to say it. Because what I want in Westeros isn't what he'd value, and pretending it is would have been dishonest. He doesn't care about kings and thrones. He understands fire and cold and debts. He looked at the horizon. I told him what connects us. The parts that were actually real. Daenerys was quiet for a moment. The grass moved around them, the evening wind running through it in long silver waves. And the throne? Do you want it? No, he said. She looked at him. I'm not sure I believe that. I know. He watched Akane's silhouette against the burning sky, banking in a wide lazy circle. I had something like it once. A village, not a kingdom, but the same principle. You spend all your time trying to make sure everyone's okay. You barely sleep. You fight constantly, not with weapons, with people's fear and stubbornness and grief. And when you finally do it, when you actually manage to make something good, he stopped. It goes on without you. That's the point of it. It goes on without you, which means you built something real. He turned to look at her. That's what I want here. Not to sit on anything. To build something that goes on. Daenerys held his gaze for several seconds. Something moved across her face that was complicated and quiet. What does that mean for me, she said finally. If you don't want the throne. That's up to you, he said. I'm not going to take it from you and I'm not going to push it at you. But I need you to want it for a real reason, not because someone told you you were supposed to. He paused. What do you actually want, Dany? It was the first time he'd used the shortened name. She noticed. She didn't object. I want people to be safe, she said, which was the same thing she'd said in the garden in Pentos, but the texture of it was different now, less rote, more examined. I've seen what happens when nobody is accountable. I've lived in the middle of it. I want something better than that. That's a real reason, he said. She looked back at the horizon. The last of the sunset was pulling red gold off the western edge of the sky, leaving something cooler and deep behind it, the first stars appearing. The throne is made of swords, she said. Aegon the Conqueror melted the swords of his enemies and built a seat of power from them. I know, Naruto said. Kurama, she said, carefully, because she had learned the name over months of proximity, learned what it meant, or as much of it as he had been able to explain, which was never quite enough. Kurama thinks it should be Ash. Naruto looked at her. He had not told her that directly. He talks to me sometimes, she said, with the smallest possible smile, the first real one he had seen that was for him specifically rather than Akane. When you're asleep. He says things. Kurama. Naruto directed it inward with a pointed quality. She asked directly, Kurama said, entirely unapologetic. I respect directness. What exactly did he say? Naruto asked. He said, Daenerys recounted, carefully, that the throne is a bad answer to a good question. The question is, how do you stop people from hurting each other? The throne says, put someone at the top who's stronger than everyone else. He said that's the answer a child gives. Naruto was quiet. He said you have a better answer, she added. He said you've always had a better answer. He just doesn't think you've decided if this world deserves it yet. The grass moved. Akane called from high above, a clear sound that carried over everything. Tell him, Naruto said, that I'm working on it. They reached the coast on a gray morning with rain coming in from the west, and a ship was waiting, not Illyrio's arrangement, but one Naruto had sent word for 3 weeks ago from a contact his father had introduced him to, a Lyseni captain named Arrow who asked very few questions and sailed very well and had, crucially, seen stranger things than a 12-year-old with a dragon and was not going to make an occasion of it. Daenerys stood at the dock and looked at the narrow sea with the expression of someone crossing a threshold they've been approaching for a long time. The rain was coming down steadily now, cold and straight, and her silver hair was dark with it against her shoulders. Ready? Naruto said. She didn't answer immediately. She watched the water for a moment, the grey chop of it, the horizon lost in the rain, and beyond it, invisible but utterly present, the continent where she had never been but which had shaped her entire life. My whole life, she said, people have been telling me what I'm going to do. Going back. Reclaiming. Taking what's ours. She paused. This is the first time I'm choosing it. Yeah, he said. She turned and walked up the gangplank with the particular straightness of someone who has made a decision and is done second-guessing it. Naruto followed. Akane launched from the dock and was airborne before they reached the deck, climbing into the rain, a dark shape rising through grey light. The ship moved. The dock fell behind. The coast of Essos got smaller and greyer and was eventually gone, swallowed by the rain and the distance. Naruto stood at the bow and felt the water under the hull and the rain on his face and Kurama warm and enormous in his chest, and the world ahead of him wide open and waiting. He was 12 years old in this body. He was decades older in everything that mattered. How do you feel? Kurama asked. He thought about it honestly, because Kurama deserved honesty and always had. Like I've been here before, he said. Not this place. This moment. Starting something that I don't know the shape of yet, with people I'm still learning, heading somewhere that's going to require everything. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Kurama made his sound, not a laugh, something between a laugh and a growl, the old Kurama sound that Naruto had been hearing his whole first life and apparently hadn't left behind when he came into the second one. No, Kurama agreed, warm as fire. You never would. The rain came down. The ship went west. Above them, circling in the grey sky, Akane's cold dark shape burned steadily in the rain that couldn't touch her, a light that moved through the storm and didn't go out. Chapter 4, The Realm of Ashes. Westeros hit them like a smell before it hit them like a landmass. Salt and pine and something older underneath both, the mineral cold of a continent that had been here since before anyone had a word for continent, and underneath even that, something Naruto couldn't name but felt in the back of his teeth. Kurama stirred when they got close enough, the way he stirred when something was worth paying attention to. Magic, Kurama said simply. Old. Sleeping. But waking. The wall? Naruto asked quietly, standing at the bow in the pre-dawn dark. Partly. But not only. The whole land. Something in it is coming back online. A pause. The same force that's waking the dead in the north is waking everything else too. Two sides of the same coin. The coast of Westeros emerged from the morning fog as grey cliffs and dark pines, and then a bay, and then a city that even at this distance carried the particular gravity of a place where enormous amounts of history had been made and enormous amounts of blood had been spilled, usually in service of the same events. King's Landing. Naruto had decided on King's Landing not because it was the safest choice, it was possibly the least safe choice, walking directly into the most politically explosive city on the continent, but because safe choices were for people who needed time, and he didn't need time. He needed to see the board directly. You couldn't play a game you were only reading about from dispatches, and 10 months of ravens from Westeros had given him information but not understanding, and understanding required being in the room. Also, strategically, appearing anywhere else first was a statement of weakness. Walking into King's Landing was a statement of something else entirely. He was 13 now. Akane was 3 and the size of 2 horses and growing faster. It was enough. They anchored in a cove a mile south of the city and came in on a smaller boat, because sailing a ship flying no banner directly into the harbor of a city in political chaos was only a statement of confidence up to a point, and past that point it was just loud. The smaller boat with no flags was a quieter opening move, and Naruto had always preferred to choose when he was loud. He had sent a raven ahead. One raven, to one address, carefully worded. Tyrion Lannister was waiting at the small dock where the boat came in, which meant either that Naruto's intelligence about the man was accurate, clever, bored, deeply uncomfortable with everything his family represented, and hungry for something real to be curious about, or that the raven had been intercepted and this was an ambush, which Naruto had assessed as the less likely of the two options and prepared for anyway. Tyrion was shorter than Naruto expected, which was saying something given that Naruto was 13 and not tall yet. He was standing on the dock with his hands in his belt and a cup of wine that he was clearly not drinking from as much as carrying for the comfort of having something to do with his hands, and he was looking at the approaching boat with the expression of a man who has been intellectually intrigued and is in the process of deciding whether the reality is going to live up to the premise. Then Akane cleared the cliff line behind the boat, and his expression changed. Naruto had seen a lot of people see Akane for the first time now. The response was fairly consistent, a sequence of disbelief, recognition, awe, and then whatever the individual's particular personality did with awe. Tyrion's response was distinctive because what his face went through was not awe exactly but something more like vindication, the expression of a man who has read a great deal about dragons and has long suspected that the absence of them from the world represented a specific impoverishment, and has just been proven right. He drained the wine cup. The boat came alongside the dock. Naruto stepped off, looked up at Tyrion Lannister, and said, "You're smaller than I expected." "And you're younger," Tyrion replied immediately. "And that," he looked at Akane, who had landed on the cliff top above them and was watching the dock with the proprietary air of someone supervising a situation, "is considerably larger than a dragon that hatched 3 years ago has any right to be." "She's enthusiastic about growth," Naruto said. "Clearly." Tyrion looked at him again, thoroughly, in the way intelligent people look at things they're genuinely trying to understand. "You said in your raven that you wanted to talk about the future of the realm." "That's what I said. Most people who want to talk about the future of the realm want to talk about their future in the realm. Usually involving a throne. I want to talk about whether the realm survives long enough to have a future," Naruto said. "The throne is a secondary question." Tyrion was quiet for half a second. "Well," he said. "That is, at minimum, a more interesting opening position than I've heard in quite some time." He looked at Daenerys, who had come off the boat behind Naruto and was standing with the wind off the bay moving her silver hair. Something moved across his face, recognition, calculation, and something more careful. "Lady Daenerys." "Lord Tyrion," she said, with the precise neutrality of someone choosing their register carefully. "Your family has been looking for you," Tyrion said. "Not all of them. Some of them were hoping you'd stay lost." "I know," she said. Tyrion looked between them, at the dragon on the cliff, at the small boat with its unnamed captain already pulling away, and at the city on the hill behind him with its smell of smoke and politics and barely contained crisis. "Right," he said. "I know a place we can talk that isn't here." The place was a tavern in the lower city that Tyrion clearly knew well enough to have a usual corner in, and the proprietor brought wine without being asked and looked at Naruto and Daenerys once and decided that the company Tyrion Lannister kept was none of his concern, which was probably the only sensible policy for surviving in this business. Tyrion talked first, which was fine because Tyrion talking was more informative than most people's deliberate briefings. He had a way of assembling information into narrative that made it easy to see where the gaps were, which were often as important as what was there. The realm was not tearing itself apart, it had torn itself apart and was now in the process of the pieces trying to reattach themselves in configurations that favored whoever was doing the reattaching. Joffrey sat the throne. Cersei ran it, through him and around him in whatever direction was most useful. The Stark family was either dead, imprisoned, or scattered, depending on which Stark you were asking about. The Tyrells had married their way into the center of power with the efficiency of people who had been waiting for exactly this kind of opening. Stannis Baratheon was on Dragonstone, burning things for a red god, which Tyrion described with the flat delivery of a man who had stopped being surprised by anything. "Robb Stark," Naruto said, when Tyrion paused for wine. "Dead," Tyrion said. "Red wedding. About 6 weeks ago." He said it without looking up from his cup, the careful casualness of someone who had feelings about this and was not going to be caught having them in public. Daenerys was very still beside him. Naruto was quiet for a moment. He had known Robb Stark only as a name in Ravens, a factor in the political equation, but the way Tyrion said red wedding, with that particular compression, like a word that contained a whole horror if you unfolded it, told him enough about what it meant. "Tell me about Cersei," Naruto said. Tyrion's expression shifted into something more careful. "She's my sister." "I know. Tell me anyway." A pause. "She is," Tyrion said slowly, turning the cup in his hands, "the most capable person in King's Landing. She is also running entirely on fear right now, fear for her children, fear of losing what she's built, fear that every threat is existential because enough of them have been." He looked up. "She is not a stupid villain twirling her fingers together. She is a mother who has decided that the world is trying to kill her children and has decided to kill the world first. That's what makes her dangerous." "Does she know we're here?" Daenerys asked. "She will within the day," Tyrion said. "The dock you arrived at is not as unobserved as you might have hoped." "I know," Naruto said. "I wasn't hiding." Tyrion looked at him. "You walked into King's Landing at 13 years old with a Targaryen princess and a dragon and no army and no, I have a dragon," Naruto said. "That's an army. One dragon. One dragon that could burn this tavern, and the street outside it, and the lower gate of the city, and the Red Keep's eastern wall, and still have enough fire left for a reasonable commentary on the gold cloaks." He said it pleasantly, without emphasis. "I'm not here to burn anything. I'm here to talk to people who are worth talking to. You were first on that list." Tyrion stared at him. "Why?" "Because you're the only person in your family who knows the difference between being smart and being right. And because you hate the game enough to tell the truth about it, which is rarer than you think." Naruto leaned forward. "I need someone who knows how this city works from the inside. Not to run it, I'm not asking for loyalty or service, I'm asking for honest information. What I do with it is my responsibility." The tavern was warm and dim. Outside, King's Landing went about its morning with the relentless momentum of a very large city that had survived too many catastrophes to be properly impressed by any individual one. Tyrion drank his wine. "What exactly do you intend to do?" he said finally. "You have a dragon, a sister, a plan you haven't fully disclosed, and the complete attention of a city that would really rather not have to deal with one more existential complication. Short term. I need to have a conversation with your sister." Dead silence. Even Daenerys turned to look at him. "Cersei," Tyrion said flatly. "Yes. You want to walk into the Red Keep and talk to Cersei Lannister. I want her to understand that I'm not here to threaten Joffrey's throne, because if she doesn't understand that she'll spend all her energy trying to remove me, and that energy is going to go badly for everyone involved." Naruto looked at him. "She loves her children. That's real. If I can make her understand that I'm not a threat to her children, she might be persuadable on the things that actually matter. And if she's not persuadable..." Naruto shrugged. "Then we find out that, and we work with it." Tyrion was quiet for a long time. The cup went around once more in his hands. "This is either the most strategically sound thinking I've heard in years," he said, "or you are 13 years old and completely insane." "Those aren't mutually exclusive," Naruto said. Tyrion looked at him. Then, despite himself, he laughed, a real one, short and genuine. "No," he agreed. "They really aren't. The Red Keep was everything the stories said it was, architecturally speaking, a statement in stone about the relationship between power and permanence that had been made by people who believed both would last forever. Walking through its gates, Naruto felt the weight of it the way you feel the weight of a place that has absorbed too much history and hasn't figured out what to do with it yet. The stones themselves seemed tired. He had sent word ahead, openly, clearly, with his name and Daenerys's name and a specific request for a private audience with the Queen Regent. He had not asked. He had stated it as a thing that was going to happen, and left enough space in the statement for Cersei to arrange the terms in a way that let her feel that she had controlled the situation. Daenerys had questioned this. "You're giving her the framing." "I'm letting her feel like she has the framing," Naruto said. The actual framing is, I walked into her city with a dragon and asked for a conversation instead of burning something. That's not a position of supplication. That's a position of choice. She's going to try to have us killed, Daenerys said. Eventually she might, he agreed. Not today, though. Today she's too curious. And curious is better than hostile. Daenerys had looked at him with the expression she was getting better at, the one where she was deciding whether his confidence was warranted or whether she should be more afraid than he was. She kept landing on the former. He thought that was correct. Akane was not in the Red Keep. Akane was on the cliff above the city, visible from the castle walls, which was better than having her in the courtyard because visible from a distance communicated I could be here more effectively than I am here, and implied threat was more useful than direct threat in rooms where you were trying to talk. The throne room was not where Cersei received them. She received them in a smaller room, a solar, well-lit, comfortable in the way that rooms are comfortable when they're dressed deliberately to communicate ease and control rather than actually containing either. She was alone except for 2 Kingsguard at the door, which was a choice that said several things simultaneously. She was not afraid, she was in control, and she had decided that bringing a council would have given too much away. Cersei Lannister was beautiful in the particular way that certain people are beautiful when every element of their appearance has been considered and managed, the way a blade is beautiful, purposefully, usefully. Her eyes were green and very sharp and they moved across Naruto and Daenerys with a thoroughness that missed nothing and catalogued everything. She looked at Naruto for a long moment. He looked back. He didn't smile and didn't not smile, just met her gaze with the comfortable directness of someone who had nothing to hide and wasn't interested in performing submission for the sake of social convention. She didn't like that. He could see it, not in her expression, which remained perfectly composed, but in the micro-adjustment of her posture, something that would have read as a shift in attention to most observers but read to him as someone recalibrating after finding no purchase. "The Targaryen boy," she said. Her voice was warm and controlled, a voice that had been used to managing rooms for years. "Naruto. That's not a Valyrian name." "No," he said. "It's not. Your mother was Lyseni." "Yes." "A bastard, then," she said, with the pleasant precision of someone placing a piece. "A Targaryen," he said, with equal pleasantness. "The other thing is just a word people use when they want to feel better about not giving someone what they're owed." A pause, brief, almost invisible. "And your sister?" She turned her eyes to Daenerys with an appraisal that was doing something more complicated underneath the surface. "You've been on the continent less than 2 days." "We came to talk," Daenerys said. "So I was told." Cersei moved to a chair and sat with the ease of someone on their own territory, and gestured toward the seats across from her. "Then talk." Naruto sat. Daenerys sat. He looked at Cersei and thought about what he knew about her, not the caricature, not the villain of someone else's story, but the person Tyrion had described. The mother running on fear. The woman who had been handed to a man she didn't choose and had built power out of the limited materials available to her in a system that considered her primary value to be decorative. "I don't want the throne," he said. She waited. "I'm not here to make a claim, I'm not here to build toward one, and I'm not here with an army because I don't currently have one. I have a dragon and a sister and a very clear understanding of what's coming from the north." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm here because the dead are walking and nobody in this city is going to survive the argument about who sits on what chair if we're still having it when the dead arrive." Cersei's expression didn't change. That was, itself, information. "The dead," she said, in the tone of someone filing a thing under improbable claims made by people with motives. "The Night King is real," Naruto said. "The army of the dead is real. The wall is not going to hold indefinitely, and when it comes down, it doesn't matter whether your son is on that throne or my sister is on that throne or the chair is empty. Everything south of the neck is food for an army that doesn't eat and doesn't stop and doesn't negotiate." "You're very confident for someone who hasn't seen this army," she said. "My source has," he said simply. She looked at him. Something moved through her eyes, the assessment was changing shape, the initial model she'd built shifting. Tyrion told you to say this, she said, testing. Tyrion told me you were smart enough to hear it, Naruto said. That's different. A silence. Outside the windows, the city made its noise. Somewhere distantly, Akane called, the sound carrying over the walls and into the room, and Cersei's eyes moved briefly to the window before returning. What is it you actually want from me, she said. Nothing right now, Naruto said. I want you to know I exist. I want you to know my sister exists. I want you to know that we have no interest in Joffrey's reign as long as Joffrey's reign isn't pointed at us. And I want you to have heard, from me directly, that the threat in the north is real, so that when it comes, because it is coming, you can't say nobody told you. Cersei studied him for a long moment. The green eyes were doing a great deal of work. You're very strange, she said finally. I've been told that, he said. Most people who walk in here with a dragon want something. I want lots of things, he said. Just not from you. Not yet. Another silence. Something in her posture had shifted, not relaxed, never relaxed, but the aggressive readiness had dialed back by a degree. She was thinking rather than defending, which was what he'd been aiming for. The dragon, she said. On the cliff. My guards say they say it glows. She glows, yes, Naruto said. The histories don't describe dragons that glow. The histories were describing other dragons. Cersei looked at him for a long moment. You know, she said, with the quality of someone saying a true thing carefully, my father would have had you killed the moment you stepped through the gate. I know, Naruto said. Your father is dead. Something flickered. Yes, she said quietly. He is. He stood. Daenerys stood with him. He looked at Cersei one more time, at the intelligence and the fear and the love that ran through her like a vein of something valuable through difficult stone, and he thought about all the ways this woman could have been different if she'd been born into a different set of choices. We'll be in King's Landing for a few days, he said. Not in the Red Keep. If you want to talk more, the invitation is open. He left. Daenerys walked beside him. In the corridor, past the king's guard who tracked them with their eyes but not their bodies, she said, very quietly, did that accomplish what you wanted? She'll think about what I said, he said. She won't act on it. But it plants something. And when it doesn't grow? Then it doesn't grow, he said. But you plant seeds before you need them, not after. Jon Snow found them. Not in a searching way, not a summons or a planned meeting, nothing that formal. They had been in the city for 3 days, staying in a house in the merchant quarter that Tyrion had arranged with characteristic efficiency and zero official acknowledgement, and on the third evening Naruto was on the roof watching Akane move against the sunset sky, and a man came up through the roof door and stopped when he saw him and said, "You're the Targaryen boy." He was not much older than Naruto's body but carried the particular weight of someone who had already been several places and none of them easy. Dark hair, gray eyes, the clothes of someone in transition between identities, not Night's Watch black anymore, but not anything else yet either. He had a sword at his hip that he was not reaching for. Jon Snow, Naruto said. How do you know who I am? Jon said. Tyrion described you, Naruto said, which was true. Also you look exactly like a Stark pretending to be something else. Jon came up onto the roof fully and stood with his hands in his belt, looking at Akane in the sky with the expression of someone who had stopped being surprised by the world but was allowing himself a moment of something simpler than surprise. I heard you talk to Cersei. Word travels. Everything in this city travels in about 6 hours, Jon said. Is it true you told her about the North? Yes. Did she believe you? She'll decide what she believes when she decides what's useful to her, Naruto said. Right now I just needed her to have heard it. Jon was quiet. He moved to the roof's edge and looked out at the city, the tangle of streets and rooftops in the cooling evening, the bay visible south of the walls, the red keep high on its hill with torchlight beginning to show in the upper windows. Akane banked overhead, her ember glow warming the air above them. I was at the wall, Jon said. I saw things. Before I came back. He said this like he was used to the statement being received with skepticism and had made a private decision to say it anyway. The Night King is real. I've seen what he can do. I know, Naruto said. Jon looked at him. You know. I know it's real, yes. I've known for a while. He looked at Jon. You died up there. Jon went very still. And came back, Naruto said. That's what the fire of the Lord of Light does, apparently. It's less impressive than it sounds from this side of it. He paused. You walked back into this city carrying what you know and everyone is looking at you like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be listened to. A long silence. Akane called. The evening deepened. Yes, Jon said, simply, with the exhaustion of someone who had not admitted this to anyone. You need to go north, Naruto said. Not to the wall. Farther. To talk to the people who've been living with this longest. The free folk. He looked at Jon steadily. You know that already. I know that, Jon confirmed. Then go, Naruto said. Stop waiting for the right person to give you permission. Nobody in this city has the authority to give you permission for what you actually need to do. Jon looked at him. He had the gray stark eyes that Naruto had been told about, and in them right now was something that was part recognition and part the specific relief of hearing the thing you already know confirmed by someone else. You're not what I expected, he said. Nobody knows what to expect, Naruto said. I find that useful. Jon looked at Akane again. She had come lower, circling in a slow gyre above the roof, the red gold light of her falling across the rooftop in a warm pulse. She's beautiful, he said, with a simplicity that was entirely genuine. She knows, Naruto said. Don't tell her. She's already impossible. Jon laughed. It was short and surprised and completely real, and Naruto catalogued it the same way he'd catalogued his father's laugh, years ago in a harbor, the sound of someone who had almost forgotten they could. Come back from wherever you're going, Naruto said. When the time comes, I'm going to need someone up north who knows how to fight what's coming. Someone with good sense and no interest in politics. I have nothing but bad experiences with politics, Jon said, which had the quality of an understatement so large it had its own gravitational field. Then you're exactly what I need. Jon nodded, once, the decisive nod of someone making a decision they won't revisit. He turned to go back through the roof door. He paused. Your sister, he said, not looking back. She should be careful. The people who want the throne are going to see her as a path to it. She knows, Naruto said. Does she know what she wants? She's figuring it out, Naruto said. Same as the rest of us. Jon nodded again and went back down through the door, and his footsteps were quiet on the stairs, and then they were gone. Naruto stayed on the roof until the last light left the sky, Akane's glow the warmest thing in the dark above him. You like him, Kurama said. He's honest, Naruto said. In a world that runs on performance, honest people are worth holding on to. He's also Targaryen, Kurama said. On his father's side. You know that. I know. That changes things. It changes what's possible, Naruto said. Not what matters. He looked up at Akane. What matters is that he's someone who'd die for the right things. This world needs more of those. On the fourth day, Cersei made her move. It was not the move Naruto had expected, which was impressive in its own right. He had expected soldiers, or an assassin, or a summons with enough guards attached to function as a command. What he got instead was a letter, delivered by a child, written in Cersei's hand, clean, decisive, the handwriting of someone who had spent years using written words as precisely as weapons. You said the throne was a secondary question. You did not say it was irrelevant. Come tonight. Alone. He showed it to Daenerys. Alone, she said. Yes. She wants you without the dragon. Akane will be where Akane wants to be, Naruto said. Which is wherever I am, give or take 100 feet. She could be trying to, if she wanted to kill me, Naruto said, folding the letter. She had 4 days and a city full of people who do that professionally. She wants to talk, and she wants to talk without her son present, which means what she wants to say is something she can't say in front of him. He looked at Daenerys. That's interesting. That's dangerous, Daenerys said. Both, he agreed cheerfully, and went to get his boots. She was waiting in the same solar, but the king's guard were gone, and the room had the quality of a place where someone had been pacing before sitting down to look like they hadn't been. You came alone, she said. You asked me to. I didn't think you would. I said I wasn't afraid of you, he said, taking the same chair as before, direct and unhurried. I meant it. She looked at him for a long moment. In the firelight she was less composed than she had been 4 days ago, not unraveled, nothing that extreme, but the management was thinner, the actual person closer to the surface. Joffrey is sick, she said. No preamble. No framing. Just that, dropped into the room like a stone into water. Naruto was quiet. He waited. Not dying. But his mind, she stopped. Started again, and it cost her something, the starting again. He could see the cost of it in the tension around her eyes. He is not capable of what this realm needs right now. He is not. I have managed it, I have covered it, but if what you say about the North is true, if there is a war coming that is not like any war that has been fought, then you need someone at the top of this kingdom who can actually lead it, Naruto said. She said nothing. That was its own answer. Tommen, Naruto said. She looked at him sharply. Tommen is what you actually have, he said. He's kind and he's young and he can be shaped by the right people around him. Joffrey is what happens when power confirms the worst in someone. Tommen is the other possibility. Cersei's jaw was set with the controlled tension of a person who is hearing a true thing they've been refusing to hear. You're talking about my son. I'm talking about your kingdom, Naruto said. And yes, your son is in the middle of that. Because he's in the middle of everything. He leaned forward. I'm not your enemy, Cersei. I'm also not your ally, not yet. But I'm telling you that what's coming doesn't care about family politics or succession law. When it arrives, and it will arrive within the year, I'm certain of that, you are going to need every able person this realm has working in the same direction. He held her eyes. Joffrey will not do that. Tommen might. A long silence. The fire moved. Why are you telling me this, she said, and it was the first time she'd asked him something that sounded like an actual question rather than a test. What do you gain from it? A kingdom that's still standing when the real war starts, he said simply. That's what I gain. She stared at him. The green eyes moving, the intelligence working, testing the edges of this, looking for the shape of the trap. There is no trap, he said. I know you're looking for one. There isn't one. I am genuinely trying to help you see what I see, because what I see is that the politics of this city are going to get everyone in it killed if someone doesn't look past them. You can't know what's coming, she said, half to herself. Kurama does, he said. And Kurama is never wrong about the things that matter. Kurama, she said. The thing inside you. Tyrion mentioned, the nine-tailed fox, Naruto said, simply. As old as this continent. Possibly older. He can feel the dead the way you feel weather. And what he feels coming from the north is not something this kingdom survives divided. The fire burned. Outside, the city was quiet in the way cities go quiet in the middle of the night. Somewhere above the red keep, he felt Akane's warmth moving through the dark air. Cersei sat with it. He watched her hold the weight of it, the mother and the queen and the frightened person and the brilliant strategist all working simultaneously, arriving at a place he had not pushed her toward but had left room for her to reach. "I need time," she said finally. "You have some," he said. "Not much, but some." He stood. She didn't call him back and she didn't have him followed. When he came out onto the street, Akane dropped from somewhere above and landed in the middle of the empty road ahead of him, folding her wings with a snap that echoed off the walls, and looked at him with her gold eyes. "Went fine," he told her. She flicked her tail. "Yes, I know it could have gone badly." "It didn't." She flicked her tail again, harder. "You're worse than Kurama," he said. "I heard that," Kurama said. "I know you did," he said, and walked back through the sleeping city with his dragon at his heel, the red gold pulse of her moving through the dark like a heartbeat, steady and warm and entirely unconcerned with anyone's politics. The realm of ashes had received them. It had not broken them. And something had been planted in the night that had not been there before, small, uncertain, but alive. That was enough for now. Chapter 5, The Long Night. The ravens came from everywhere at once. That was how Naruto knew it had started, not from one source, not from a single report that could be doubted or explained away, but from everywhere simultaneously, the way bad news travels when the thing causing it is large enough to generate its own weather. The ravens came from the Night's Watch, from the Lords of the North, from the free folk runners that Jon had organized in the months since he'd gone back, and from one raven that arrived with no seal and no signature and a single line in a hand Naruto didn't recognize. "It's moving." All of it. Now. He was in Dragonstone when they arrived. They had moved to Dragonstone 6 months after King's Landing, because Dragonstone was defensible and because it was Targaryen in its bones. The stone itself had been shaped by dragonfire centuries ago and retained something of that in its structure, a warmth in the walls that Akane responded to by pressing herself against them and making a sound like a very large and contented cat. It was also, crucially, a staging point. Close enough to the continent to move fast, far enough from King's Landing to have breathing room. Daenerys had spent those months doing what she was increasingly extraordinary at, talking to people. Not performing, not politicking in the way that King's Landing required, but actually talking, listening to the small folk who had been forgotten by everyone currently fighting over their lives, understanding what the realm looked like from the ground rather than from a throne room. She had been to the Reach twice, to the Stormlands once, and had come back each time with both a clearer picture of what was wrong and a harder anger about it that was, Naruto thought, the right kind of anger, hot enough to move but cold enough to aim. Tyrion had come to Dragonstone of his own accord 4 months ago, arriving on a small boat with 2 bags and the expression of a man who had decided that the direction the wind was blowing made one destination significantly more attractive than another. He had been formally dismissed from his position as Master of Coin by Cersei in a move that Naruto suspected was less about his performance and more about proximity to him, and he had arrived at Dragonstone, looked around at the volcanic rock and the Targaryen banners that Daenerys had quietly begun flying, and said, "Well, this is cheerful." He had not left. Jon had come back from the north 2 months ago with 300 free folk and the particular look of someone who had seen something they could not make smaller by describing it. He had sat with Naruto for 4 hours and talked, and what he described was worse than what the ravens had been suggesting, which meant the ravens had been understating things, which was its own kind of information. The Night King had something none of the histories had prepared anyone for. An army of the dead was expected, the histories mentioned it, the legends confirmed it, the Night's Watch had been screaming about it for years. What Jon described was the scale of it. Not hundreds. Not thousands. Hundreds of thousands, and growing, because everything the Night King killed joined his army, which meant the army was its own expanding resource and the only way to stop the expansion was to stop the Night King himself. The generals, Jon had said. The White Walkers, they're not just soldiers. They're the source of the others they've raised. If you kill a walker, everything it raised falls. And the Night King? Naruto had asked. Jon had looked at him. Everything falls, he had said simply. Naruto had spent a long time that night sitting with Kurama, turning this over. Can you feel him? He had asked. Yes, Kurama had said, and the quality of the answer had been different from anything Naruto had heard from him in 2 lives. Not afraid. Kurama did not do afraid in any conventional sense, but aware in a way that carried gravity. He is very old and very cold, and he is not a person in any way that matters. He is a principle. Entropy. The end of things. The magic that made him, was the opposite of the magic that made me, Kurama said. Where I was fire and life and chaos, he was ice and death and order. Perfect stillness. Perfect ending. A pause. He will be the hardest thing you have ever fought. But not unbeatable. Nothing is unbeatable, Kurama said. Some things are just expensive. When the ravens came, Naruto read them all, stacked them in order, and walked out onto the cliff above the sea where Akane was sleeping in a pool of her own warmth, her scales casting red gold light across the dark rock. She raised her head when he came. She was 4 years old now, and she was enormous, not the size of the dragons in the history books, not yet, but enormous in the specific way that made the comparison to large horse feel like an understatement, the way calling the ocean large puddle was an understatement. When she spread her wings they cast shadows like storm clouds. He put his hand on her neck and felt her warmth move through his palm and up his arm. Kurama, he said. I know, Kurama said. I felt them cross. The dead are through the wall. How? The Night King rode the dead dragon through it. A pause, and then something that in a human would have been called grief, briefly, not for the dragon specifically but for what it meant. It was not a clean break. The wall itself, the magic in it, came apart with the stone. Whatever was contained by it is not contained anymore. Naruto looked north. He couldn't see anything, obviously, there were hundreds of miles between Dragonstone and the wall, but he felt it anyway, the same way you feel a storm coming when the air changes and the birds go quiet. A cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Okay, he said, to Akane, to Kurama, to the night in general. We go now. The conversation with Daenerys was not a conversation, it was 2 minutes, both of them already moving, him saying what was happening and her nodding before he finished and going to find Tyrion, because they had prepared for this, had been preparing for months, and preparation means you do not spend time being surprised. Jon was in the war room when Naruto got there, already looking at the maps with the focused intensity of someone calculating distances. Winterfell, Jon said, before Naruto said anything. Winterfell, Naruto agreed. They're moving south. The dead move faster than an army because they don't need rest and they don't need food. We have, he looked at the map, 4 days, maybe 5 before the vanguard reaches the neck. The living in the north, Jon said. There are still people, Jon. Naruto looked at him. We cannot save everyone. We have to stop the source. Jon held his gaze. He had gray eyes that went very still when he was thinking, and right now they were very still. The Night King. The Night King, Naruto confirmed. Everything else is managing symptoms. Killing the Night King ends it. But we have to get to him, and to get to him we have to get through what he's brought with him, and what he's brought with him is enough to bury a country. What do you need from me? Jon said. Take whoever will follow you north. Keep the dead focused on a ground force. Give me something to fly toward. He looked at Jon steadily. Can you do that? Jon looked back at him with the expression of a man receiving a task that he knows is likely to kill him and has made peace with that fact. Yes, he said. Don't die, Naruto said. I've died once already, Jon said. I didn't enjoy it. Then don't do it again. Jon almost smiled. He nodded once and left the room. Tyrion appeared at Naruto's elbow with the particular timing of someone who had been nearby listening and had decided his entrance was warranted. And me, he said. You and Daenerys stay with the fleet, Naruto said. South of the neck. If it goes wrong, define it goes wrong, Tyrion said. If Kurama and I don't stop the Night King and the dead keep coming. He turned to face Tyrion directly. You take Daenerys and you go as far south as you can and you warn everyone you can reach. It won't be enough, probably. But you do it anyway. Tyrion looked at him for a long moment. You're planning to go alone. Not alone, Naruto said. Kurama. The other dragon, Daenerys said from the doorway, having appeared with the silent speed of someone who had been listening from the beginning. Akane isn't a dragon, Naruto said. Not the way the histories mean. And Kurama isn't a passenger. He looked at his sister. Kurama is what I am. We're not a boy on a dragon. It's different. And what the Night King has to face is not a Targaryen and his mount. It's something this world hasn't seen. Daenerys crossed the room and stood in front of him, and she was taller than him still, he was growing but hadn't finished yet, and she looked at him with those violet eyes that were, at this moment, entirely uncovered. No shell, no careful management. Just her, looking at him the way she'd been looking at him for months when she thought he wasn't paying attention. Come back, she said. Plan to, he said. That's not a promise. It's all I've got, he said. But I've kept promises with less. She put her hand against the side of his face, brief and fierce, and then stepped back with the kind of deliberateness that meant she had decided not to say anything more because she couldn't trust what would come out. He let her have it. He understood. He went to find Akane. They flew north in the dark. Akane had not been asked to fly hard before, not like this. She had flown long distances, had flown through storms, had flown at altitude where the air was thin and cold. But she had never flown with the full weight of Naruto's intent behind it. The specific pressure of everything depends on how fast we get there, and she responded to it the way she had always responded to things that mattered, with herself, completely, no reserve. She was extraordinary in the air. She had always been extraordinary, but tonight she was something beyond it, the wind off her wings strong enough to flatten the sea below, her inner fire burning brighter than it ever had, the red-gold glow of it lighting the underside of the clouds as she climbed to altitude and banked north with a speed that left the fleet behind in minutes. Inside him, Kurama was fully awake, not the warm cold presence of every day, but the full sun, the vast burning awareness of a being that was now operating at his actual scale in a world that had no frame for it. Naruto could feel his own body running hotter than it should have been. Kurama's energy threaded through him like a second circulatory system, the familiar golden weight of it pressing behind his eyes and at his fingertips. How are you? Kurama asked. Ready, Naruto said. You're afraid, Kurama said, without judgment. A little, Naruto admitted. Not of dying. Of not being enough. You were always afraid of that, Kurama said. It's the fear that makes you try harder than anyone else. Don't lose it. Just don't let it make you hesitate. The north came up beneath them, first the neck, dark and treacherous marshland, and then the wider dark of the north proper, forests and rivers and empty moorland, and then something that changed the texture of the air. Cold. Real cold. Not weather cold, but the cold that had a direction and a purpose, the cold of something enormous and deliberate moving through the land below. I see them, Naruto said. The dead were a sea. He had known they were numerous. Jon had told him. The ravens had told him. Knowing a number and seeing the reality of that number were still different things, and looking down from altitude at the army of the dead moving across the northern landscape was one of the most viscerally terrible things he had ever seen, including things from his first life that had been terrible in their own right. There were hundreds of thousands of them, moving with the unified purpose of something directed by a single will, no gaps, no stragglers, no confusion. Just a mass of dead things moving south with the absolute patience of the inevitable. At their center, elevated on a hill that jutted above the gray mass like a ship above a sea, he saw the Night King. He was not difficult to find. He was the stillest thing in a landscape of motion, the cold axis around which everything turned. White and ancient and present in the way that fundamental forces were present, not dramatic, not performing, just there, irrevocably. Naruto felt Kurama go very quiet in the way Kurama went quiet when he was gathering himself. Below and to the east, 3 miles out, a fire line appeared, Jon's people, the free folk and the living forces that had rallied, launching fire arrows into the dead vanguard in an attempt to buy time and draw attention. It was working. The dead were turning. Now, Kurama said. Akane, Naruto said. Down. She folded her wings and dropped. The wind was a physical thing at this speed, a roar that drowned everything. The dead grew from a carpet to individuals to specific faces as they fell, and then Akane opened her wings and leveled, 50 feet off the ground, and breathed. The fire was not red gold at full force. It was white. It was the temperature at the center of Kurama's power, the fundamental heat that had nothing to do with combustion and everything to do with the energy that ran through the world at its root level. The stream of it hit the dead army like a breaking wave, and where it touched, things did not merely burn, they ceased, the connection severed cleanly, the cold animating force dissolved by something that operated at a level it couldn't answer. A corridor opened in the dead army 50 feet wide and 300 feet long, the figures on either side of it simply stopping, the light leaving them, falling in place. The Night King turned. He had blue eyes that were not eyes in any human sense, they were lit from behind by something ancient and absolute, and they found Naruto in the air with the precision of a thing that knew exactly what it was looking at. He raised one hand. 6 dead things rose from the ground immediately below Akane, not whites, something else, something that had been knights or warriors once, the best of whatever the Night King had collected, moving with a speed and coordination that the mass of the army didn't have. They had weapons that were ice and something more than ice, and 2 of them reached Akane's underbelly before she got altitude. She screamed, not pain, but fury, a sound that split the night and woke something that had been sleeping in the land itself, and rolled, throwing the dead things off, climbing hard. One left a mark along her left flank that smoked where it touched, the cold of the ice weapons fighting the heat of her skin and losing but leaving evidence. You're okay, Naruto told her. Keep climbing. The Night King is preparing, Kurama said. He's going to raise everything that's died in this battle so far. The dead from Jon's people. He's going to use them. How long? Minutes. Then we don't give him minutes. He felt Kurama's agreement like a physical thing, a surge of warmth that was also something else, something older and deeper, the decision of a being of enormous power to commit that power completely. It moved through Naruto's body like a tide coming in, filling all the spaces, and his hands, where they gripped the ridge of Akane's spine, began to glow. Orange first, then gold, then the particular brilliant gold-white of Kurama's chakra at full expression. Akane felt it. She turned her head briefly and looked at him with one gold eye, and then she turned back and climbed faster, because she knew this, had felt this in the years of their partnership, knew what it meant and what it required from her. Ready? Naruto asked. Always, Kurama said. They came down on the Night King from above, directly, no angle, no strategy of approach, just straight down, because he could see the trajectory and the time it bought and because the Night King was not a general to be outmaneuvered from a distance. He was a source to be extinguished. The Night King raised his spear of ice. Naruto released Kurama. Not fully, not the way it had happened once, in another life, against another enemy, not a complete externalization. More like opening a door that had always been there, letting the fullness of what lived inside him be visible in the world outside him. The golden-orange chakra that had been visible at his hand spread outward, and where it spread the air above Akane became warm in a way that the cold of the dead ground below could not answer, and the Night King's spear, thrown with the terrible precision of something that had been practicing for 10,000 years, hit the edge of that warmth and did not stop, but slowed, and turned, the ice spear kissing the chakra aura and deflecting 12 inches. Enough. It scored along Naruto's left arm instead of through his chest. The pain was clean and immediate and he acknowledged it and set it aside. Akane hit the hill. Not the Night King directly, the hill he stood on, the elevated position, the ground itself. She hit it with full weight and full fire simultaneously, both wings spread for impact, and the ground where she landed became the surface of a star for approximately 3 seconds, white heat penetrating the frozen earth and the cold magic in it and dissolving it the way salt dissolves ice. The Night King staggered. Naruto had never seen him stagger before. Jon's account had not included anything like it. He dropped from Akane's back before she'd fully settled, hit the scorched ground running, closed the 20 feet between himself and the Night King in a way that operated below the threshold of what most human eyes could track, and hit him. Not with a weapon. With his hands, the chakra forming dents around them, the Rasengan a thing of pure instinct that he'd been building since he left Akane's back, not the compact spiral of the technique in its original form but something that Kurama's full investment had made into something else, something that spun with the specific frequency of life energy, the opposite of what the Night King was. It hit him in the chest. The sound was not an explosion. It was a crack, the sound ice makes when something warmer than it should be enters it suddenly, the structural failure of something that has been rigid for too long meeting something that refuses to be cold. The Night King did not fall immediately. He looked at Naruto. Those blue burning eyes, ancient and absolute. His face, which had never been intended to express anything, expressed something in that moment, not fear, not that, but something. Recognition. The acknowledgement of something he had not expected. His mouth moved. No sound. But Naruto read it. Fire, was what he said. Yeah, Naruto said, hands still blazing. The real kind. He hit him again. This time the crack spread. It moved across the Night King's surface the way cracks move across ice when the weight becomes too much, not from the center out but from everywhere at once, every point of internal stress suddenly releasing. The blue light in his eyes fractured. The cold that had been radiating from him like a physical presence contracted, pulled back, tried to hold itself together. Around them, the dead army lurched. Not fell, lurched, the way a marionette lurches when the strings are disturbed. Hundreds of thousands of figures stumbling, losing the unified purpose that had been directing them, the individual connections to the central will fraying. Naruto gathered everything Kurama had to give. Everything, the whole vast burning sum of it, the partnership of 2 lives and 10,000 years of the fox's own existence, all of it directed at the single point where the Night King was cracking, where the cold was failing. He pressed his hands flat against the Night King's chest and let it go. The light was visible from 50 miles in every direction. Jon's people saw it from 3 miles east and stopped fighting because there was nothing to fight, the dead around them had simply stopped, the light leaving them all at once, falling where they stood, no sound except the collective fall of hundreds of thousands of empty bodies settling onto the frozen ground. The Night King came apart. Not violently, not with drama, not the way the stories would have wanted. He came apart the way things come apart when the force holding them together stops, piece by piece, from the inside out, the cold releasing into the air as vapor, the form dissolving, the ancient animating will simply, ending. The last thing to go was the eyes. And then there was just Naruto, standing on a scorched hill in the middle of a field of fallen empty bodies, his left arm bleeding, his hands cooling from white to gold to orange to normal, Kurama settling back inside him like a tide going out, slow and warm and utterly spent. Akane came to him. She pushed her head against his side and he leaned into her, heavily, letting himself have the weight of it. Did we get him? He said. He knew they had. He was asking because sometimes you needed to say a thing out loud. Yes, Kurama said, quieter than usual, the quiet of something enormous at rest. He's gone. All of them. Every one. He looked across the field. The dead were still. Just dead now, the old kind of dead, the kind that stayed where it fell. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, not dawn yet but the first suggestion of it, the dark separating from itself to allow the possibility of morning. His arm hurt quite a lot. He was cold. He sat down on the scorched earth of the hill that wasn't cold anymore and Akane curled around him, a living wall of warmth, and he put his back against her side and looked at the lightning sky. Kurama, he said. I'm here, Kurama said. Thank you, Naruto said. A pause. Long enough that he thought Kurama was going to make some dry remark about how gratitude was unnecessary and he would have done it regardless. But what came instead was just, thank you too. He closed his eyes and listened to Akane breathe. The sky went on getting lighter. Jon found him an hour later, riding through the field of fallen empty dead with 3 free folk warriors and a face that had been through several difficult stages of the last few hours and had arrived at a controlled and careful calm. He pulled up his horse and looked down at Naruto sitting against Akane's side on the scorched hill, arm bandaged with cloth from his own shirt, looking up at the morning sky. Jon looked at the field. At the 10,000 fallen dead stretching in every direction, still and quiet, the cold gone out of the air for the first time in what felt like longer than a night. He looked at the hill, scorched black in a perfect circle, and at the absence at its center where something ancient had been and was no longer. It's done, he said. It's done, Naruto said. Jon dismounted. He came and sat on the hill beside Naruto, not saying anything, which was the right choice. They sat together while the morning came in from the east, slow and gray and then gold, the light moving across the field of the fallen dead, and above them the sky went from black to deep blue to the particular pale clarity of a morning after something enormous has ended. The living ones north of us, Naruto said eventually. We'll go, Jon said. Today. Take food, Naruto said. They'll need food. And fires. Real ones. He paused. And tell them the cold is over. Jon looked at him. Is it? Really over? The source is gone, Naruto said. The rest is just winter. Westeros has survived winter before. Jon nodded. He looked out over the field. Something moved across his face that was grief and relief in equal and simultaneous measure, the specific expression of someone who has survived a thing they expected to die in. What happens now? Jon said. Naruto thought about Daenerys on Dragonstone, thinking clearly about what the realm needed and building toward it with her whole capable self. He thought about Tyrion somewhere on a ship south of the Neck, probably drinking and definitely thinking. He thought about Cersei in the Red Keep, making decisions at speed, and Tommen, young and kind and possibly, the thing that was needed there. He thought about the small folk Jon was about to ride to, cold and hungry and alive because the dead had stopped. He thought about a throne made of melted swords. Now, he said, we go south and finish the other war. Jon looked at him. The political one. The political one, Naruto confirmed. Which is going to be harder in all the ways that are less immediately life-threatening and more permanently annoying. Jon exhaled. Almost a laugh. Yes, he said. It will be. Akane lifted her head above them, looked at the morning sky with her gold eyes, and called, once, long and clear, the sound carrying across the field and up into the air above it and beyond, the kind of sound that travels farther than it should because something in it insists on being heard. The long night was over. The morning answered. Chapter 6, What Fire Leaves Behind. The raven from Dragonstone arrived before Naruto had finished bleeding. He read it one-handed, the other arm wrapped in a proper bandage now that Jon's healer had insisted on seeing to it, and the message was 3 words in Daenerys's handwriting, which was small and precise and allowed no room for ambiguity, come home. Now. He showed it to Jon. Something's happened, Jon said. Something's always happening, Naruto said. He folded the raven. Can you manage the north from here? I've been managing it for years, Jon said, which was true and said without self-pity, just fact. Go. Naruto went. The flight south was different from the flight north. The north had been urgency and dark and the specific pressure of knowing what was at the end of it. The south was morning, and the world was very quiet in the way that things go quiet after enormous sound, not peaceful, not yet, but the particular hush of a world catching its breath. The landscape below him was winter pale and still, the rivers dark between their frozen banks, the forests dense and gray-green, and here and there, where settlements were, the thin vertical lines of cook fires rising into windless air. People were alive down there. Because of what had happened on a hill in the north. He turned that over as Akane flew, not to feel proud of it, pride was not exactly what it was, but to feel the weight of it, the real specific weight of lives continuing that might not have continued, because that weight was important. You did not do things like what they had done last night and then fail to understand what it meant. You're very quiet, Kurama said. Thinking, Naruto said. About last night? About what comes next. He watched the land move below. We stopped the dead. That part was, I knew how to do that. I understood what I was fighting. What's waiting in King's Landing is more complicated. Is it? Kurama said. You've always been better at the complicated things than you give yourself credit for. That's not true. I've always been better at the simple things. The right things. The North was simple, the Night King was wrong, stopping him was right. King's Landing is going to be full of people who are all partly right and partly wrong simultaneously, and none of them will agree on which parts. Yes, Kurama said. That's called politics. I hate politics. I know. You're very good at it anyway. That's the worst thing you've ever said to me. He felt Kurama's warmth move through him in the way that was amusement and affection and would never be described as such. The narrow sea appeared below, grey and cold, and then Dragonstone's rock rising from it, the castle on its peak, the Targaryen banners moving in the sea wind. Akane circled once, the way she always circled once before landing because she had never lost the habit of surveying a place before committing to it, and then she came down onto the cliff-top landing area with the controlled precision of something very large that had gotten very good at not breaking things. Daenerys was already there. She had come out before Akane finished landing, which meant she had been watching from a window or a lookout, which meant she had been waiting. She stood on the scorched landing stone in the sea wind with her silver hair blown back and her eyes on him, checking, his arm, his face, the general inventory of whether he was intact, with the focused attention of someone who has been running through possible outcomes for hours and is now accounting for the actual one. He climbed down. She crossed the space between them and put her arms around him, which was not something she had done before, not like this, not with the complete absence of the careful shell. He returned it, because it was true and because she deserved truth in a world that had given her very little of it. You scared me, she said into his shoulder. I scare myself sometimes, he said. She pulled back. Looked at his arm. How bad? It'll heal. He met her eyes. What happened? Your raven said, Joffrey is dead, she said. He had not expected that. How? Poison. At his own wedding feast. She turned and walked, and he fell into step beside her, through the castle door and into the corridor beyond, the sea wind cut off as the stones closed around them. It happened 2 days ago. Cersei has accused Tyrion. Naruto stopped walking. Tyrion is here. He was here. He's not anymore. She kept walking. He left this morning. For King's Landing. He said, she paused, something complicated moving across her face, he said that if he ran it looked like guilt, and if it looked like guilt they'd execute him, and he wasn't going to die for something he didn't do. She looked at Naruto. He also said he had a meeting to attend that was more important than his trial. What meeting? He didn't say. Naruto started walking again, faster now. Kurama. I heard, Kurama said. Tyrion is either very brave or completely insane. Both, Naruto said. He's always been both. They took a ship. Not because Akane couldn't carry them, she could, now, easily, but because arriving on Dragonback at a city that had just lost its king and was currently in the process of deciding who to blame was a statement that deserved calibration. He had thought carefully about this on the voyage from Dragonstone, standing at the bow with the grey water moving below and Akane flying wide circles overhead and Daenerys beside him doing the thing she did now when she was thinking, which was stand very still and look at the horizon. Tell me what you're thinking, he said. Tommen is 12 years old, she said. Cersei is going to be the only power in that room, completely, and she is going to be terrified, and terrified Cersei is more dangerous than any other kind. Yes, he said. She's going to want to control everything that enters King's Landing. She's going to close down every option that doesn't run through her. And she's going to be trying to find who actually killed Joffrey. She stopped. And she's going to tear the city apart doing it, Naruto said. Which means the people in the city are going to have an extremely bad few months. He looked at the horizon. What do you want to do? She turned to look at him. I want to help. I want to, she stopped again, testing the thought. I want to go into King's Landing and I want to be there, visible, present, someone Cersei has to account for instead of ignore, because if I'm on Dragonstone while she consolidates then by the time it matters she'll have built walls I can't enter without burning them. That's a good assessment, he said. But you think there's something I'm missing, she said, reading his expression. I think you're right about the political math, he said. I also think that walking into King's Landing the day after Joffrey's death is a statement. It says we're moving on Cersei's grief. And Cersei will read it that way, and she'll never forgive it, and she'll spend the next decade waiting to return that. Daenerys was quiet. So what do we do? We send a message first, he said. Before the ship arrives. We give her the information and let her choose what to do with it. He paused. We tell her Joffrey is dead and the Night King is dead in the same message. We tell her the real threat is over. And then we let her decide whether she wants to be at war with us or not. What if she chooses war? Then we'll know, and we can stop pretending otherwise. He looked at her. But I don't think she will. Cersei is ruthless and she's frightened and she does terrible things, but she's also, underneath all of it, a realist. She knows what she has in Tommen. She knows what we have in Akane. She has spent months in the back of her mind calculating this equation, and she is going to arrive at the same answer I did. Which is that tearing the kingdom apart fighting us is going to leave nothing worth fighting for, he said. And she loves her children too much to leave them nothing. Daenerys looked at him for a long moment. The sea moved. The ship's timbers creaked. Overhead, Akane banked in a long slow turn, the red-gold light of her trailing across the grey water. You believe that, Daenerys said. It was not quite a question. I believe she's capable of it, he said. Whether she chooses it is on her. Daenerys looked at the horizon. And Tyrion? Tyrion is going to be fine, Naruto said, with a certainty he hadn't entirely examined. Is he? Kurama asked. He's Tyrion, Naruto said. He survives through cleverness and spite. He's got an abundance of both. The message arrived in King's Landing before the ship did, delivered by a raven that Daenerys wrote and Naruto looked at and decided not to change because she had said it exactly right, the Night King is dead. The long night is over. The dead will not reach your walls. We come in peace and ask for the same. We are ready to talk. No signature. They did not need one. There was only one party that could send that message and have it be true. The response came back in 6 hours, when they were still a day's sail from the city. It was one word, no signature. Come. The city was different. Naruto had been here twice before, but both times the city had been a thing in its own ongoing process, turbulent and self-contained. Now it was something else, present, watchful, the way a person is present when they have just received news that changes the shape of what they thought they knew. The streets were full in the particular way of streets where everyone has heard something and not yet decided what to do about it. The raven had beaten them to the city, obviously. The raven, and then whatever the raven had turned into as it passed through the gold cloaks and the city watch and the conversations at docks and in markets and in the small houses of the lower city where people talked about things in a way that nobody in the Red Keep ever thought to listen to. By the time Akane cleared the city walls, visible from everywhere, the fire of her a moving light above the rooftops, there were people in the streets who had come out to look. Not at the dragon specifically. They had seen a dragon now, more than once. They were looking at the dragon the way you look at something when news has reached you before the thing itself has, and you are trying to reconcile the story with the reality. He heard someone say it, from a rooftop where a woman was watching Akane pass overhead. 2 words in the common tongue, spoken to the woman beside her with a simplicity that made them land harder than any speech: "It's over." He filed that away. The shape of those 2 words said to someone who had been waiting for them. Cersei was in the throne room. Not on the throne, Tommen was on the throne, small and young and very upright, his feet barely reaching the footrest, his eyes serious in the way children's eyes go serious when they understand that something enormous is happening around them and they are trying to meet it. He had, Naruto noted, his mother's eyes, green, sharp, but something else in the structure of his face that was his father's, or his supposed father's, something softer. He looked at Naruto and Daenerys when they entered with a directness that was not hostile but was entirely present. Cersei stood to Tommen's right, 1 step below the throne. She was in black, formal mourning, and her face was different. He had seen Cersei composed and Cersei dangerous and Cersei calculating, and this version was all 3 of those and something underneath all 3 that he had not seen before. Grief, real grief, not performed, the kind that gets into the joints. Joffrey had been cruel and destructive and had made everything around him harder, and she had loved him anyway with the total and unconditional force of a mother's love, and his death had cracked something open. Naruto walked the length of the throne room and stopped at the appropriate distance, and he looked at Cersei and then at Tommen, and he bowed, not a deep bow, not the full court genuflection, but a real one, a deliberate one, given to the boy on the throne as the acknowledgement of a king. Tommen looked surprised. Then he straightened slightly, receiving it. "King Tommen," Naruto said. "I'm sorry about your brother." The throne room was very quiet. The court, whatever was left of the court, half empty and rearranged by crisis, held its breath. Tommen said, "Thank you." His voice was steady. He was 12 years old and his voice was steady. Naruto looked at Cersei. She was looking back at him with those green eyes, the grief and the wariness and something that had changed since the last time they were in a room together. Something that had moved, slightly. He didn't name it because naming it would make it smaller than it was. "My raven was true," he said, to her directly. "The Night King is dead. Jon Snow's forces are securing the north and caring for the living. The dead are fallen." He paused. "Westeros is whole." He heard the sound move through the room, not a sound exactly, more the physical response of a collection of people processing information that mattered, a collective exhale. Cersei said nothing. She was looking at him with an expression that was doing a great deal of internal work. "We did not come here to make demands," Daenerys said, stepping up beside Naruto with the ease of someone who has decided where they stand and is standing there. "We came because the realm survived the long night and there is work to do in the morning." "What work?" Cersei said. Flat. "Careful. The North needs food and supplies," Naruto said. "The free folk need recognition, land rights, the same protections as any other free people of this realm. The neck needs infrastructure, the flooding from the battle will be a problem through spring. The wall," he paused, "the wall is down. Parts of it. Whatever comes after the wall has to be built by the living, and it has to be built together." Cersei's eyes moved across both of them. Naruto watched her do the calculation: power, threat, option, cost. The calculus of someone who thinks in those terms without being able to stop. "And the throne," she said. "Tommen is king," Naruto said. Silence. "You're not making a claim," Cersei said, and it was the first time he had heard genuine uncertainty in her voice. "Not weakness, uncertainty, which is different, which is the space where intelligent people acknowledge that something doesn't fit their model." "No," he said. "Your sister has her own thoughts," Naruto said, and looked at Daenerys beside him, giving her the floor. Daenerys looked at Tommen on the throne. She looked at the throne itself, the Iron Throne, the thing made of swords, the thing she had been raised her entire life to want. Naruto watched her look at it. He had not told her what to say. He had told her months ago that it was her choice, genuinely hers, and he had meant it, and now she was making it. "I don't want the throne," she said. "Not like this." She looked at Cersei. "Not because I'm afraid of you. Because taking it by force from a 12-year-old boy after his brother just died is not the kind of rule I want to build. If the realm chooses me someday, the actual realm, the people in it, not the houses maneuvering above them, then I'll answer that. But I'm not here to take anything." The room was profoundly still. Cersei looked at Daenerys for a long moment. Something crossed her face that was, startlingly, in the neighborhood of respect, reluctant and unannounced and gone again quickly, but there. "Then what are you here for?" she said. "To help," Daenerys said. "If you'll let us." Tyrion was in the dungeons. Naruto found this out from a guard who confirmed it in the way guards confirm things when they sense that the person asking is someone who could make their next hour go either very smoothly or very badly, and Naruto took the information without comment and went to the dungeons. They were cold and damp in the way of dungeons that had been built by people who felt that comfort had no business being in a space designed for the opposite, and Tyrion was in a cell that was at least not the worst one, sitting on a stone bench with his legs crossed and a cup of wine that he was definitely drinking this time rather than carrying for comfort. He looked up when Naruto came in and his expression moved through several things quickly, settling on a combination of relief and affected nonchalance that was the Tyrion version of "I knew you'd come and I'm not going to admit how relieved I am." "You're alive," Tyrion said. "You're in a cell," Naruto said. "I am, yes. The food is acceptable but the ambience leaves something to be desired." He tilted his head. "The Night King? Dead." Tyrion exhaled slowly, and the exhale carried the weight of something he had been holding for a long time. "Good," he said. "That's very good." He paused. "You look terrible, for someone who just saved the world." "I have a cut on my arm," Naruto said. "And you're filthy." "I slept on a scorched hill." Naruto crouched outside the cell. "Did you kill Joffrey?" "No," Tyrion said, without defensiveness, just fact. "I did not. I know who did, though, or who arranged it. Littlefinger, most likely, with the Tyrells' cooperation or at least their willful blindness." He looked at Naruto steadily. "I also know that proving it is going to be extraordinarily difficult, because the people who did it are very good at not leaving evidence." "Cersei knows you didn't do it," Naruto said. Tyrion blinked. She knows. She's doing it anyway, because you are the available target and because grief is making her move fast and she'll revise later when the grief gets quieter." He stood up. "I'm going to get you out of here." "Cersei is not going to, I already spoke with Tommen," Naruto said. "He's the king." Tyrion stared at him. "You went to the 12-year-old king directly?" "He's smart," Naruto said. "He's going to be good at this, if the people around him stop treating him like furniture." I told him what I knew about the murder, in brief, without accusation, just the shape of it, that his brother's death was political and not personal, which matters to a kid trying to understand the world, and I told him his hand was in the dungeons for something he didn't do. He paused. "He told the guard captain to release you." "About 30 seconds before I came down here." Tyrion looked at him for a very long moment. The wine cup went around in his hands. "You know," he said, "every time I think I have a reasonable model of how you operate, you do something like this. Is that a problem?" "It's deeply inconvenient for anyone trying to predict you," Tyrion said. "Which I mean as a compliment of the highest order." He stood. The cell door was, as it turned out, already unlocked. The guard captain apparently worked quickly when motivated. He pushed it open. He stood in the corridor and breathed the slightly less damp air of it and looked at Naruto. "What happens now?" "Now," Naruto said, "we go figure out what a kingdom looks like when it's not falling apart." "That sounds significantly harder than fighting the dead," Tyrion said. "It is," Naruto agreed. "You're better at it than I am." "I am," Tyrion agreed immediately. "Yes. The conversation with Cersei happened in the evening, in the solar, the same room as always, and this time there was no performance from either of them, no careful management, no testing of angles. She was in black and she was tired in a way that the composure couldn't fully cover, and she looked at Naruto and Daenerys across the table with the expression of someone who has been running on adrenaline and grief and fury for 3 days and has arrived at the part where those things have burned through and what's left is the person underneath. "I know Tyrion didn't do it," she said. "Not as confession. As statement of fact. I also know I can't take it back right now without it looking like weakness," Naruto said. "Yes. It doesn't look like weakness," he said. "It looks like accuracy. Whoever killed Joffrey is still in this city. Still near your son. That should matter more than what people think of the correction." She was quiet. The fire moved. "Littlefinger," she said. The word landed flat, not as accusation but as confirmation of a suspicion. "That's where the evidence points," Naruto said. "The Tyrells may have known. The Tyrells need careful handling because you need the reach and you cannot afford to push them away, so the handling of that is yours to judge." He looked at her. "Littlefinger needs to go. Not later. Now." "He's in the Eyrie," Cersei said. "He went north after the wedding." "I know," Naruto said. Littlefinger in the Eyrie was Littlefinger with Lisa Arryn in control of the Vale, which was a resource and a threat in one, and he would spend every moment of his time there building toward whatever he was always building toward. He needs to be removed from the board. However you choose to do that. "And you'd trust me to do it," she said, with the specific edge of someone who has been mistrusted for so long they're surprised by the alternative. "I'd trust you to do what's necessary when your son's safety depends on it," he said. "That's not the same as trust in every direction. But it's enough for this." She looked at him. She had been looking at him like this all evening, not the assessments of their earlier meetings but something more direct, the look of someone trying to understand a thing that doesn't fit their existing categories. "You're not like anything I know how to deal with," she said. It was not a compliment and not a complaint. Just an observation. "Good," he said. "I'm not trying to be." She looked at Daenerys. "And you? You genuinely do not want the throne?" "Not today," Daenerys said, which was more honest than no, and Cersei clearly recognized it as such. "Today I want the realm to be intact and the people in it to be safe. The rest is a question for a different year." Cersei turned a cup in her hands, wine, barely touched, present for the same reason Tyrion's cups were always present. "Then what do you want from me?" she said. "Specifically." "From me." "A council," Naruto said. "Not the small council, that's yours to run. Something separate. The North needs to be represented. The free folk need a voice. The people who held against the dead need to know the South is listening." He looked at her. "And I need Tommen to have advisors who are genuinely trying to teach him how to rule rather than trying to rule through him." "That's a significant ask," she said. "I know," he said. "You have a son who has a real chance to be a good king if the right people help him. The realm just survived an existential war and it is more exhausted and more open to change than it will ever be again. There is a window here, Cersei." He held her eyes. "I am asking you to help me open it wider rather than using it to consolidate. The fire. The sea outside. The city and all its lives." She said nothing for a long time. He let her take the time she needed, because this was not a decision to rush, and because he had learned, over 2 lives, that the most important moments were the ones where you had the patience to let things resolve at their own speed. "The northern representatives," she said at last. "I will not have wildlings in the Red Keep." "Free folk," he said. "Free folk," she repeated, the correction received. "I will not have them in the Red Keep. But I will," she paused, choosing carefully, "accept a meeting. Outside the walls. Neutral ground." "That's enough," he said. "For a start." She looked at him. You always say that. It's always true, he said. He found the Iron Throne by himself, late that night. He had not been in the throne room alone before. He had only seen it with ceremony around it, with the weight of other people's attention directing the meaning of the room. Alone, in the dark, with only the banked torches and the moonlight through the high windows, it was something different. He stood in front of it for a long time. It was exactly what it was, a chair made of weapons. 1,000 swords, melted and reshaped, bent into something that was designed to be uncomfortable on purpose, because the man who built it had believed that a king who sat easily on his throne had forgotten what it cost. There was a logic to that, even now. A brutal logic, but logic. Kurama was quiet. Naruto looked at the throne. He thought about everyone who had sat in it. The ones who had been good, briefly, and the ones who had been terrible, and the ones who had been both in different years, and what all of them had in common, which was that they had believed the chair was the thing that mattered rather than the work the chair was supposed to represent. He thought about the Hokage monument in Konoha, the stone faces carved into the mountain. He had wanted that, once, desperately, his face on the mountain, the acknowledgement, the proof that he existed and mattered. He had gotten it, eventually. And what he remembered from the years after was not the monument. What he remembered was the work. The 1,000 small decisions, the exhausting necessary arguments, the moments when someone who had been afraid became unafraid because you had been patient enough to stay. The throne is a bad answer to a good question, Kurama had told Daenerys, months ago. He reached out and put his hand on the arm of the Iron Throne. The metal was cold. Just metal. It didn't pulse, didn't respond, didn't carry anything mystical. It was exactly what it looked like, a chair made of swords, sitting in a room that history had made important, and waiting for someone to decide what that importance actually meant. You're not going to sit in it, Kurama said. No, Naruto said. But you're not going to burn it either, Kurama said. Not tonight. He looked at the throne. No, he said. Not yet. Maybe not at all. Then what? He thought about Tommen, 12 years old, sitting very straight with his feet not quite reaching the footrest, his eyes serious. He thought about Daenerys, choosing not to take something she had every claim to because she had decided that what mattered was not the taking. He thought about Jon, somewhere north of the neck right now, doing the unglamorous and necessary work of making sure people had fires and food. He thought about Tyrion, already back in his apartments, probably writing something sharp and useful. He thought about the free folk, living in the south for the first time, in land that did not know their names and would need to learn them. You build something that goes on without you, he had told Daenerys. That's the point of it. He took his hand off the throne. Not the chair, he said quietly, to the empty room. Never the chair. What goes around it? He left the throne room. The throne sat in the dark behind him, cold and silent and unchanged, and he did not look back. The council met for the first time 3 weeks later, in a long hall in the lower city that was neutral enough to offend nobody and practical enough to actually work. It was not formal, there was no dais, no throne, just tables arranged in a rough square and chairs that were all the same height because Naruto had insisted on this and had been surprised by how much resistance it generated from people who had strong feelings about chairs. The free folk representatives, 2 of them, a woman named Agra who had been one of Jon's most trusted organizers and a man named Torin who was the eldest of the Valley clans, sat across the table from 2 Reach lords who had agreed to come because Tyrion had asked them personally and because the Reach needed trade routes more than it needed to maintain the position that free folk were beneath its notice. Tommen was present, which had been Naruto's condition and Cersei's reluctant agreement, because a king who governed through intermediaries learned nothing. A representative from the Iron Islands had come, which nobody had expected, sent by Yara Greyjoy who had heard about the council from a Lyseni merchant and had decided that being in the room was better than not being in it. 2 northern lords. A woman from the streets of King's Landing who ran the only functioning food distribution network in the Flea Bottom district and who Daenerys had invited personally and who had come with the barely contained incredulity of someone who had never been invited to anything by someone who lived in a castle. Tyrion opened the meeting. He was good at opening things. "We are here," he said, "because the realm nearly ended and didn't, and the morning after nearly ending is the only time anyone is willing to actually talk to anyone else. So we're going to use it." He looked around the table. "Nobody in this room agrees about everything. That's fine. That's correct. Agreement isn't the goal. The goal is that when we leave here, some problems that were problems before we arrived are smaller than they were." He paused. "I'll start with the food issue, because starving is unpleasant regardless of which political position you hold." Naruto sat at the table and said nothing for the first hour, which was deliberate. He had found, over a lifetime of leading things, that the first hour of any meeting revealed more about what was actually true than the next 10, if you were quiet long enough to let it. He watched the Reach Lords, who were there because they had to be and were doing the math on what they could extract while appearing cooperative. He watched Agra, who was doing the same math but from a different position and with different variables. He watched Tommen, who was listening with complete and genuine attention to everything that was said, asking occasional quiet questions that were, invariably, the right questions, the ones that went to the practical heart of things rather than the political surface. "He really is going to be good," Kurama said. "He needs years," Naruto replied. "And the right people. Tyrion is one of the right people. Tyrion is possibly the right person for this specifically. He's brilliant and he has no illusions about power and he finds the suffering of ordinary people morally intolerable in a way he covers with wit but can't entirely hide." Naruto watched Tyrion work the table, the quick intelligence of him moving through the room. That combination is rare. Daenerys was to his right, making notes in her small precise handwriting, occasionally asking questions that were the other half of Tommen's questions. Where Tommen went to the practical, she went to the structural, the underlying systems. Why did the food distribution fail? Not just that it failed. Who had the authority to redirect grain stores, and what happened when that authority was disputed? She was building a picture, he knew, the same way she had been building a picture since Pentos, patient and thorough and aimed at something real. He had been waiting for the moment to say the thing he'd come to say. It arrived in the second hour, when the conversation turned to the question of the North, specifically, the question of who held authority in the North now that the Stark line had been broken and scattered. "The North answers to itself," Agra said, bluntly. "It has always answered to itself." One of the Northern Lords started to argue. The Reach Lords started to argue. Tyrion put up a hand that neither of them respected, which was predictable. Naruto said, "She's right." The room turned to him. He had been quiet long enough that the attention had a specific quality, not just the normal attention of a room turning toward whoever spoke, but the attention of people who had been waiting for him to speak without admitting that they were waiting. "The North answers to itself," he said again. "That's not a negotiation position, it's a fact of geography and culture. It has been true for 1,000 years and it will be true for 1,000 more. The question isn't whether the North governs itself, it's whether the rest of the realm is going to work with that reality or fight it." He looked at the Northern Lords. "You'll accept representation on a council that doesn't override your internal governance?" The elder of the two lords, a gray-haired man named Ondus who had the look of someone who had outlasted several kinds of crisis, said, "That depends on what the council can actually do." "What do you need it to do?" Naruto said. A pause. "Trade protections," Ondus said. "We need the Reach to stop using the position of the grain routes to make political demands during hard winters." "That's reasonable," Naruto said, looking at the Reach Lords. They shifted. The Crown will guarantee fair weights and passage," Tyrion said, with the speed of someone who had been waiting for exactly this exchange. "In exchange for which the Reach agrees that grain is not a political lever. Those terms are written, stamped, and I have 3 copies prepared." He pulled them from his coat. Naruto had wondered what he'd been doing in his rooms last night. The Reach Lords looked at the documents. The older of them picked one up. "Read it. Read it again." Mopedus had a similar arrangement in place, he said slowly. "I know," Tyrion said. "I improved it. The document moved around the table. It was not everything, nothing was ever everything, the first day of anything was never the finished version. But it was real and it was workable and it was something that had not existed this morning. The woman from Flea Bottom had been silent for most of the meeting, watching with the watchful attention of someone learning the dialect of a new language. When the grain document had been reviewed and the conversation moved on, she looked at Daenerys and said, "The water. The water in the lower city is, 4 months ago we had 3 wells. Now we have 1 and the other 2 are blocked by rubble from the," she paused, choosing her word, "from the repairs after the battle. Nobody has fixed it." Daenerys looked at Tommen. Tommen looked at the lord who theoretically controlled the city's infrastructure with the specific look of a young king who has just realized something was not being done and is deciding what to do about that. "Fix it," Tommen said. Simply, directly, without performance. The lord sputtered. Tommen held his eyes with the steady patience of someone who has been taking notes for 2 hours and understands the problem specifically and is not interested in the excuses that precede fixing it. "Fix it," Tommen said again. "This week." Naruto said nothing. He felt something warm in his chest that was not Kurama, or not only Kurama, the particular warmth of watching someone be right. He found Jon's letter when he returned to his rooms that night. Not a raven, a letter, delivered by a rider who had made the journey south specifically, which meant it mattered in a way that ravens couldn't quite convey. He broke the seal and read it by candlelight while Akane slept in the courtyard below, her warmth visible through the window. Jon's handwriting was not beautiful. It was the handwriting of someone who had learned under difficult circumstances and kept the utility without the elegance, straightforward and clear. "The North is holding. The free folk are settling in the gift, which is causing arguments, which I'm managing. Arya Stark came back, I'll tell you about that in person because it requires too many words. Bran Stark is here too and says things that are unsettling in ways I can't fully explain. The wall won't be rebuilt as it was. There's no point. What held things back was the magic, and the magic is gone, and rebuilding stone without the magic is just a wall, and walls without magic are doors with more steps. I'm thinking about what comes after, which is, complicated. The wildfire didn't solve the wildfire problem. We need something better. Come north when you can. There's something you need to see." Naruto read it twice. Then he put it in his coat and looked out the window at Akane's sleeping form, the steady pulse of her, the red-gold warmth of her against the dark stone of the courtyard. "Something he needs to see," Kurama said. "I know," Naruto said. "Bran Stark," Kurama said, with a quality that was careful in a specific way. "The three-eyed raven's successor. You know about that." "I know about things that see through time," Kurama said. "I have feelings about them." "Good feelings or bad feelings?" "Complicated feelings," Kurama said. "The boy sees. He's not wrong to see. But seeing everything can make you forget that what matters is the now of it, the specific people in the specific moment, not the pattern of it from above." A pause. "He's going to try to tell you what you're supposed to do. What the shape of things is. And I'm curious," Kurama said, "to see whether you listen. What do you think I should do?" "I think," Kurama said, "that you already know what you're doing. I think you've always known. I think the three-eyed raven is going to tell you something true and it's going to be true and you're going to thank him politely and do the thing you were going to do anyway." Naruto thought about this. "Yeah," he said. "Probably." He went to find Daenerys. She was on the battlements. Of course she was, she always went to the battlements when she needed to think, the same way he went to rooftops, because high places had a particular quality of perspective that made the immediate feel less overwhelming. She was looking at the city, at the lights of it spread below in the dark, the familiar shape of it that she had now been looking at for weeks and was slowly making into something she knew. He came and stood beside her and looked at the city with her. "What are you thinking?" he said. "I'm thinking that it's very large," she said. "The city. All the people in it." She paused. I used to think about the throne in the abstract. The idea of the throne. The returning queen, the dragon, the destiny. She turned her head to look at him. Now I think about the well in Flea Bottom. He smiled. Is that strange? She said. It's exactly right, he said. She looked back at the city. If Tommen rules well, and I think he might, I think he actually might, then there is no throne for me to take. Not morally. Not without being exactly what I've been telling myself I'm not. Yes, he said. And if he doesn't, she said, then I'll be here. Still here. Doing the work regardless. She looked at him. I've been thinking about the East. About the people I've been hearing about who are still enslaved, in Essos. Who don't have anyone, go, he said. She blinked. What? Go east, he said. Not forever. Not to conquer, to change things. You're extraordinary at talking to people who have been told they have no options. Go do that in the places that need it most. He looked at her. Westeros has people working on it now. Good people. Tyrion will keep Tommen honest. Jon will keep the North together. I'll be here. He paused. But you have something specific and the East is where it's needed. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read, which was unusual because he had spent nearly 3 years learning to read her. You'd send me away, she said. I'd let you go, he said. That's different. She was quiet for a moment. The city lights moved in the wind below. You realize, she said, that this is the second time you've done this. Done what? Asked me what I want, she said, and then, actually, arranged everything around the answer. She said it with the wondering quality of someone who has not yet stopped finding something surprising. Most people ask what you want so they know how to manage you. I know, he said. You don't do that. No, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she put her hand on his arm, the injured one, but gently, with a care that was its own kind of statement. When I come back, she said, we should talk about what happens next. What happens after East, he said. What happens after all of it, she said. The shape of things. What we're actually building. She paused. Together. If you want that. He looked at her. He thought about Sarel, his mother in this life, standing in the narrow garden with the 2 lemon trees that grew out of spite and holding him when he cried without knowing why. He thought about Mira, gripping his shoulder at the city gate and telling him not to do anything stupid. He thought about every person he had ever chosen to love, in 2 lives, the specific weight of that choosing, how it was never a small thing even when it looked like it from the outside. Yeah, he said. I want that. She nodded once, the decisive kind. She turned back to the city. He turned back to the city. They stood on the battlements together for a while, looking at the lights of a place that was, against all the odds that history had stacked against it, still standing. He burned the throne on a Wednesday. Not because Wednesday had any particular significance. Because it was the day that everything that needed to be in place was in place, Tommen's council reformed and staffed, the Northern Agreement signed, the Free Folk land rights formalized, the Flea Bottom wells repaired and 2 more dug, Daenerys 3 days gone east on a ship that Tyrion had quietly arranged with a Lyseni captain who asked very few questions. It was the day that the throne became the last thing on the list, and Naruto had always been someone who finished lists. He told Tommen. They were in the throne room, the 2 of them, Tommen standing in front of the Iron Throne and looking at it with his mother's green eyes, and Naruto had explained what he was going to do and why, and Tommen had listened with the complete genuine attention that was, increasingly, his most significant quality. Why now? Tommen said. Because the realm survived something that should have ended it, Naruto said. And the way you mark that is by acknowledging that what came before, what the throne represented, how power was held, needs to be different from what comes after. Tommen looked at the throne. My father sat there. And his father. And, I know, Naruto said. History is in it. I'm not taking the history away. History lives in people and books and the things they build and the stories they tell. It doesn't live in the chair. He paused. What do you want to sit in, when you rule? Tommen thought about it. It was, Naruto had found, one of the things that made him worth working with. He actually thought about things, genuinely, instead of reaching for the nearest available answer. Something that doesn't cut you, he said finally. Yes, Naruto said. Exactly. So it was Tommen who gave permission, which mattered, and it was Tommen who stood and watched from the gallery above while Naruto walked into the throne room alone. Akane came through the throne room doors behind him. She had not been in here before. She looked at the throne with her gold eyes, her head tilted, and then looked at Naruto. Yeah, he said. Go ahead. She breathed. The fire was white at the center and red gold at the edges. The full force of her opened up in a space she'd never been allowed to fully open up in, and it hit the Iron Throne with the specific quality of something that had been made by dragonfire meeting something that knew how to receive it. The iron sang first, a high, resonant note that moved through the stone floor and up through the soles of his boots, and then began to move, the structural integrity of it giving way to the heat, 1,000 swords that had been bent into a shape beginning to return to something simpler. Kurama added his warmth to it. Naruto felt it happen, the decision, internal, the vast burning presence joining the fire from outside the way a river joins the sea, the temperature in the throne room climbing past anything the stone had held in centuries. The Iron Throne did not melt in the way a metal usually melts, slowly from the edges in. It went all at once, the whole structure losing its form simultaneously, becoming what it had always been underneath the shape, metal, just metal, lying in a pool of itself on the stone floor. And then Akane breathed once more, harder, and the pool caught, not melting further but burning, the fire finding something in it that was more than material, the accumulated weight of centuries of what the chair had been and what it had done, and for one long moment the fire was so bright that the throne room was lit as if by daylight. Then it went out. The pool of metal cooled quickly. What remained was not dramatic, a flat irregular spread of dark metal on the stone floor, still radiating heat, the surface already beginning to show the blue-gray of cooling iron. It was slightly smaller than the base of the throne had been. It was, Naruto thought, about the right size for a table, if someone wanted to make something useful from it. He stood and looked at it for a while. Akane pressed against his side. He put his arm over her neck and leaned into her warmth, the comfortable, familiar warmth of her, the constant presence of her. Well, said Kurama. Yeah, Naruto said. How do you feel? He thought about it. He looked at the cooling metal on the floor, at the scorch marks on the stone around it, at the throne room that was just a room now, a large room with high windows and echoing stone and the smell of hot metal in the air. He looked at the gallery above, where Tommen stood very still with his hands on the railing, watching with his serious green eyes. Like something started, he said. Not ended. Endings are just starts with different lighting, he said, which was something Iruka-sensei had said once, a long time ago in a classroom in a village that no longer had him in it, and which had turned out to be true in more ways than one. He turned and walked back toward the throne room doors. Akane walked beside him, her claws clicking on the stone, her warmth moving through the space they walked through and leaving it warmer for a moment after they passed. Behind them, the metal cooled. The marks of fire remained in the stone, permanent and honest, the record of a choice, made on a Wednesday, by someone who had burned thrones before in a different life and knew what they were worth. He came out into the corridor, and Tommen was already coming down from the gallery, and Tyrion was there with a cup of wine and the expression of a man who had been present at historically significant moments before and was, at this one, allowing himself something that was genuinely close to peace. So, Tyrion said. The throne is ash. The throne is a table, if someone wants to be practical about the metal, Naruto said. Tyrion looked at him. What do we do now? What we've been doing, Naruto said. The wells. The grain. The north. The east. He looked at Tommen. The next thing on the list. Tommen nodded. He was 12 years old and the king, and he had just watched the throne he was supposed to sit on be reduced to a puddle and had decided, watching it, that this was the beginning of something rather than the end, which was exactly the right decision. What's on the list today? Tommen said. The Iron Islands want to talk about independence, Tyrion said, already unfolding a letter from his coat with the efficiency of someone who had never once in his life waited for an appropriate moment. Yara Greyjoy sends her regards and also a moderately threatening note about naval rights in the Sunset Sea. I've met Yara, Naruto said. She's not going to agree to anything that doesn't treat her as an equal. Start from there and don't try to manage her into it. I know, Tyrion said, slightly indignant. I've also met Yara. Then you know she'll see through the managing. Yes, yes. Tyrion tucked the letter away. There's also the matter of the Vale's response to the Northern Land Agreements, which they've been conspicuously slow about, Littlefinger. Still in the airy. Cersei is working on it. Let her work on it, Naruto said. She's more motivated than we are. They walked down the corridor, the three of them, with the castle morning beginning around them, servants moving, a distant sound of the city outside the walls, the smell of breakfast from somewhere below, and the sea air coming in through the windows that looked east toward the water where the morning light was already bright and honest on the waves. Naruto walked and listened to Tyrion and thought about ravens he needed to send and people he needed to speak with and the long unglamorous ongoing work of it, and somewhere in the middle of all of that he noticed, the way you notice things that have always been true but stop being background, that he was entirely, specifically, genuinely happy. Not the consuming joy of a battle well fought. Not the sharp relief of crisis survived. Just the warm, grounded, durable happiness of someone doing the thing they are made to do, in a place they have chosen, with people they have found. Kurama, he said. I know, Kurama said. I feel it too. Outside, Akane called from somewhere above the castle, her voice carrying over the walls and into the city beyond, the clear bell sound of her that people in the lower city had started to stop and listen for, the way they listen for something they've decided means something, not a threat, not a symbol, just a presence. Just something warm, circling overhead, keeping watch. The morning was bright and the list was long and there was work to do. He went to do it.